Are you lying in bed, tossing and turning, but sleep still will not come? Crescent moon. Let these ancient Zen stories gently carry you away from worries, ease your mind, and lead you into a peaceful sleep. In the next few hours, all you need to do is close your eyes, breathe slowly, and listen. Your troubles will fade away like clouds drifting off at sunset. Find a position that feels truly comfortable. You may lie down or sit still. As long as your body feels supported with ease, gently close your eyes, letting the darkness wrap around you like a thin blanket. Now, bring your attention to your breath. Inhale slowly, hold for a brief moment, and exhale deeply. Each breath becomes like a soft wave, carrying you farther from the shore of worries, guiding you into a calm sea. With every exhale, imagine letting go of a layer of tension, releasing invisible burdens from the day, until your whole body feels lighter. Starting from the top of your head, allow your mind to drift like a cool breeze, softly noticing each part of your body. Your forehead, your eyes, your cheeks, all are invited to soften and relax. Feel your eyelids grow heavier, but in a gentle way, like the weight of a warm blanket. Shift your awareness to your neck and shoulders, the places that often hold so much tension. As you exhale, let your shoulders drop, as if you were setting down a long-carried burden by the side of the road. Your arms follow, your elbows, your hands, everything loosens, leaving only stillness behind. Now listen to the steady rhythm in your chest, where your heart has been working patiently without pause. Notice your breath moving through your chest and belly, rising and falling like the surface of a calm lake. Each breath is a small wave, and all you need to do is drift with it. Relax your belly, let your back soften, and allow your body to sink deeper into where you are lying. All tension melts away, leaving behind only warmth and ease. Slowly, bring your awareness down to your legs. Feel your hips, thighs, knees, calves, and finally your feet. Even your toes are at rest now, with nothing left to do. At this moment, your entire body has let go, like a river lying flat and still after the rain. There is nothing to hurry for. There is nothing to worry about. You only need to lie here and let sleep gently arrive. Teacup Story 1. The Cup of Tea. One quiet afternoon, in an old temple nestled deep in a bamboo forest, a scholar came to see a well-known Zen master for guidance. The scholar was highly educated, filled with knowledge from books, and full of confidence that he already understood much. Sitting before the master, he began speaking endlessly about philosophy, about what he had read, heard, and experienced. His voice flowed on and on like a flood, leaving no space for silence. The Zen master remained quiet, smiling faintly, and poured tea for his guest. The cup in front of the scholar slowly filled, then began to overflow, spilling onto the table and running along the grain of the wood. Alarmed, the scholar exclaimed, "Master, the cup is full. It cannot hold any more." The master paused, looked into his eyes, and gently replied, "Like this cup, your mind is already full of knowledge and opinions. How can I pour anything more into it? If you wish to learn, you must first empty your cup." His words did not sound like a reproach, but rather like a distant bell echoing through the still afternoon. The scholar fell silent, feeling layers of pride dissolve, leaving only stillness. Looking down at the overflowing cup, he saw each drop as the old ideas he had been clinging to. At that moment, he realized that to receive truth, he first had to empty his mind. And so it is with you. Right now, as you lie listening, perhaps your heart is crowded with many things: unfinished work, worries about tomorrow, sounds that have not yet faded. But imagine your mind as a cup of tea. Each exhale is like setting down a drop of fullness. Each inhale is a chance for your cup to grow lighter, emptier, ready to welcome peace. You do not need to do anything. Only let the flow continue naturally. And allow the cup in your heart to become open and light. The Master's words settled like an evening bell. And in that stillness, the scholar began to notice what had always been there but drowned out by his own voice. The gentle bubbling of water in the kettle. The wind brushing past old roof tiles. The soft scratch of a dry leaf against the windowsill. And the subtle fragrance of tea that he had not sensed until now. He closed his lips, bowed his head, and his hand unconsciously rested on the polished wooden table, where a stain of spilled tea was slowly spreading and then coming to rest. "Empty my cup," he whispered to himself. The simple phrase carried the weight of a stone sinking to the bottom of a pond. Inside, it felt as though thousands of books had opened and closed at once. Like doors shutting in unison to reveal a wide open space. That space was not frightening. It was cool, calm, like the shade beneath bamboo. He lifted his eyes and met the Master's gaze, peaceful, unhurried, without expectation, simply present like the surface of a still lake. Then the Master picked up the kettle, wiped the rim of the cup, and poured again, this time stopping at just the right moment. Not a drop too much. Before handing it to him, "The tea is ready," the Master said softly. The scholar received it with both hands, lifting the cup as if it were something fragile. He did not rush to drink. He watched the thin spiral of steam rise, the still surface of the tea, then took a small sip. Warmth spread through his throat. A faint floral note lingered, and a gentle bitterness dissolved away. The feeling was simple, yet strangely complete. He sat quietly, sipping again. No more explanations were needed. No more arguments were waiting their turn. Only tea, breath, and the presence of another sitting across from him. The Zen master said nothing more. The silence between them was not a wall, but a wooden bridge, wide enough for the breeze to pass through. From the back courtyard came the steady sound of a young monk sweeping leaves. The rhythm of the broom, swish, swish, reminded one of the ordinary flow of life. The scholar set the cup down and slowly asked, "Master, I have read so much about the path. Yet why do I still feel weary? Still incomplete?" The Master looked out the window, where a sparrow had just landed on the eaves before flying away, and answered, "When you walk the path, do you ever look up at the sky? Or do you only count your steps?" The scholar hesitated. "I count my steps," he admitted. "Then try looking up." The Master smiled. "It is the same path. But the sky is far greater than all the words." Hearing this, the scholar felt as though someone had opened a window in a room long closed. A cool breeze touched his forehead, carrying with it the scent of leaves, of earth, and of rain lingering from the afternoon. After the cup of tea, the Zen master stood and led his guest for a walk around the temple courtyard. The stone path did not run straight but curved gently around a cluster of bamboo. Then passed by a small pond. On the surface of the water, a few yellow leaves floated, swaying with the breeze. The master bent down, lifted one leaf, set it back on the water, and said, "Do you see? The leaf does not resist the water, so the water carries it." The scholar watched the drifting leaf and wondered how many times he had struggled in debates, only to end up more exhausted. They reached the far end of the courtyard, where a small patch of vegetables grew. The rows of greens were fresh and vibrant. The weeds had sprouted between them. The master handed him a bamboo basket and a small knife. "If you have time, you may help pull some weeds. No need to hurry. Just notice where the roots are." The scholar was not used to manual work. He crouched down, awkwardly using the tip of the knife to loosen each root. The earth was damp, carrying its raw scent. Each time he pulled out a clump of weeds, he placed it into the basket, hearing the soft brush of leaves against each other. Like a quiet sigh, no one was scoring him. No one was applauding. There was only the gentle sweat forming on his forehead, and the strange clarity of simply seeing a pale root running deep, seeing a tender leaf breaking through the soil, seeing his own hands doing work he once believed were only meant for writing and pointing. At that moment, a large cloud moved across the sun. The wind shifted. Soon after, a light rain began to fall. The master walked toward the veranda and called, "It is raining." The scholar hurriedly stood, cradling the basket of weeds, and ran to the shelter. The rain was not heavy, only enough to wet the ground and release a stronger scent of earth. Under the roof, they stood side by side. In the rain, sounds became sharper, drops falling from the tips of bamboo leaves, water tapping on the wooden eaves, the temple bell ringing faintly from a distant tower. Then fading, the master closed his eyes for a moment, as if to take it all in. The scholar closed his eyes too. He discovered that when the eyes were shut, the sounds did not vanish, they became nearer, clearer. There was no need to give them names. Rain was simply rain. The bell was simply the bell, and yet his heart grew still. When he opened his eyes, the rain had nearly stopped. A few rays of sunlight slanted through the bamboo. Glistening droplets clung like tiny glass beads to the leaves, ready to fall at any moment. He let out a long exhale, as though releasing an invisible burden. The master looked at him and simply said, "Do you see now?" The scholar nodded. No explanation was needed. That evening, the Zen master prepared a simple place for him to rest in the guest hall: a thin mat, a clean blanket, a small pillow, beside a window that opened toward the bamboo garden. "Sleep early," the master advised. "Before you sleep, place your hand on your belly and follow your breath. If a thought comes, let it pass by like a cloud. And if a cloud lingers, the wind will carry it on." The scholar lay down. At first, his body was stiff, unused to the unfamiliar bed. He heard the quiet footsteps of someone walking outside in the hall. Then silence. He followed the master's words, placing his hand on his belly, feeling it rise with each inhale and fall with each exhale. At first, his mind kept running, thinking about what he should ask the master tomorrow, about how the phrase, "empty the cup," might connect to various systems of thought, about whether he could write an essay on today's experience. But each time a thought arose, he remembered the cloud and let it drift. Strangely, when he did not chase them, the thoughts grew fewer, like the wind had shifted. He heard insects in the night, a drop of water falling into the courtyard, a leaf brushing lightly against the eaves. These sounds asked nothing of him. They were simply life, breathing. Before long, he fell asleep, his first dreamless sleep in many weeks. At dawn, the wake-up bell rang evenly. The scholar opened his eyes to see the sky outside the window pale blue, dew still clinging to the leaves. He went to the well to wash his face, the cool water refreshing his whole body. The Zen master was already in the kitchen, cooking thin porridge. He handed the scholar 2 bowls. "Take these to the home of the elders in the village. They sent word yesterday." 2 steaming bowls were set inside a bamboo basket, covered with a cloth. The path from the temple down to the village sloped gently, lined with fields on both sides. The scholar walked carefully, placing each step firmly so the porridge would not spill. He realized that if he rushed, the porridge would ripple. If he breathed too quickly, his hands would tremble. So he adjusted his rhythm, breathing in gently, exhaling slowly. At the elder's house, he knocked, handed over the food. No one asked who he was, and he did not need to explain his title. On the way back, he felt light, as though he had done something small, yet right. The master took the basket from him and only smiled. No praise, no criticism. That smile was enough. After breakfast, the master led him to the storeroom and gave him a soft broom. "Sweep the chanting hall," he said. "Sweep the dust, but do not sweep the mind." The scholar almost thought he had misheard. Sweep the dust, but do not sweep the mind. What could that mean? He carried the broom inside, opened the window to let light in. Dust rose into the air, thin as smoke. He swept slowly, watching the path of the broom. Each time it touched the floor, the dust gathered, then disappeared into the pan. After a while, he realized, if he swept too quickly, the dust rose again. If too slowly, it fell back down. There was a rhythm, neither fast nor slow, like breathing. Do not sweep the mind, he began to understand. Do not turn this task into an effort to forcefully change yourself. Do not make it a project of healing. Do not use it to defeat some old self. If you do, the mind only fills again. Just sweep the floor, that is enough. When the room was clean, he stood in the middle, palms pressed together. Not because anyone was watching, only because the open space before him called him to bow. The day passed in this way, simple yet full. The Zen master spoke little, but each word was like a small stone placed by the roadside, left for the traveler to notice, to step around, to find footing upon. At noon, they sat again for tea. This time, the master handed him the kettle. "You pour." He carefully tilted it, listening to the sound of water, watching the cup, and stopping at the right moment. Not too much, not too little. A strange joy rose within him, the joy of doing one small thing just right. The master nodded slightly, saying nothing. A perfect cup of tea. The scholar thought, and yet my heart feels as if I have set down a great weight. Looking out, he saw white clouds drifting slowly, the sky clear as polished glass. That afternoon, the master called him to visit an old wooden bridge at the foot of the mountain. The bridge was small, crossing over a shallow stream. The water flowed gently. The planks were worn in places, firm in others. "This bridge is repaired every year," the master said. "It cannot be made permanent, but each time it is fixed, people cross safely for another year." The scholar touched the rough wood. recalling the grand systems of philosophy he had studied, each one a bridge dreaming of eternity. But life is always flowing. Eternal bridges may exist only on paper. This small bridge, though temporary, carried people across the stream every day. Suddenly, he felt at ease with the word temporary. Temporary, yet enough, he thought, as if hearing an answer from within. That night, he slept soundly again. Before closing his eyes, he remembered the first cup of tea overflowing, the master's words, and how he had once tried to reason through everything. Now those urges to argue were like a dog that used to bark at every passerby. It was still there, but no longer ruled the yard. He let it bark a few times. Then it grew quiet. His breath remained steady. He slept. On the third day, the Zen master told him it was time to return. But before he left, the master handed him a small cup wrapped in cloth. "For you," he said. "Remember to use it." The scholar unwrapped it. It was an ordinary cup, glazed white with a faint ivory rim. No elaborate design, only a thin line circling its side. "Use it, for what?" he asked. "For drinking tea, of course." The master smiled. "And to remember to stop at the right moment." The scholar bowed deeply, grateful for a gift so light in weight yet heavy with meaning. At the temple gate, he turned back. "Master, may I return again?" "The gate is always open," the master replied, "but what matters most is the gate within." The scholar understood. Meeting the master did not always require climbing a mountain. Sometimes, even in the middle of the city, he could still be within the temple courtyard, if his mind was empty. On the way home, he walked past rice fields heavy with forming grain. The wind moved through, and the entire field rippled like waves. He stopped for a long time, only to watch that movement. When he was young, he had passed by countless fields with his eyes fixed on a page inside his head. Today, he felt he no longer needed to prove his intelligence with answers. He tried closing his eyes, listening as he had the previous night, the wind, the leaves, the sound of his own footsteps along the narrow ridge between paddies. No one was asking questions. No one was giving grades. Life was presenting itself, complete. He opened his eyes and smiled. When he arrived home, he set the cup on his desk where piles of manuscripts used to be. He cleared some books away, not to discard knowledge, but to return empty space to the desk and to his eyes. Each morning, before beginning his work, he boiled water, warmed the pot, and poured tea into that cup. He practiced pouring to the very brim and stopping, watching a single drop bead along the edge of the glaze before drawing the kettle back. He took a sip. Each day was the same in that small ritual. And each day was new. Sometimes memories returned of old debates. The times he won and the times he lost. The memories did not vanish. They visited like passing clouds. He watched them move on. When someone asked about the source of his change, he simply told the story of the teacup and smiled. There was no need for another essay. One evening, heavy rain swept across the city. He opened the window, sat near the frame, set the cup on the sill, and listened to rain tapping the roof. The smell of wet earth drifted into the room. In the rain, he suddenly heard the master's voice, "If a cloud lingers, the wind will carry it on." He realized that all this time he had allowed the wind to do the wind's work, to carry away unneeded thoughts. He no longer had to resist. no longer had to force his mind to stop thinking, because the effort to stop thinking was just another thought. He watched the tea's surface quiver as a few stray drops blew in. The ripples settled, and the surface smoothed again. That was enough. In the cool air, he wrote a short line in his private notebook: "Do not be full." In the months that followed, he returned to the temple a few times. Each visit, he did simple things: carrying water, sweeping the courtyard, pulling weeds, bringing porridge. The Zen master still spoke little. Sometimes they spent an entire afternoon watching sparrows jostle for a few fallen grains of rice. On one visit, he asked, "Master, I still read. How much should I read?" The master answered, "Read until you can hear a blank page speak." "A blank page?" "Yes." The master nodded. "A blank page says nothing. But when you are quiet, you can read it." He did not ask more. On the way home, he opened a book and paused at the blank page between the second and third parts. He closed his eyes. The page was silent, yet within that silence, he heard cars moving in the street, voices from the apartment next door, the clock's hand rising notch by notch. Everything seemed to rest upon a single still surface. He smiled, closed the book, and poured tea. One day, a young student came to him asking about various philosophies. He listened without interruption, letting the youth run on exactly as he himself once had. When the student finished, he poured tea and told the story of the cup. "If you wish to learn, begin by emptying your cup," he said, but he did not rush to lay that phrase on the other as a rule. The young man smiled with a hint of stubbornness. "But how do I become empty?" He did not answer right away. He led the student out onto the balcony and pointed to a cloud dissolving. "Watch that cloud. Is it trying to dissolve?" "No," the youth frowned. "It simply dissolves." "Yes," he said, "that is enough to begin." The student said nothing. A moment later, he asked to borrow a broom. He handed it over, smiling to himself. Perhaps each person needs a room to sweep, a row to weed, a bowl of porridge to carry for someone else, so plain. And yet the path opens. Another night, the full moon rosé. He carried the cup up to the rooftop. The moon was round, silver light spilling across rooftops and treetops. He poured tea, stopped at the right moment, and set the cup down. Inside the cup, a small moon appeared, full to the very rim of the glaze. He looked closely and suddenly understood. The cup can hold the moon only when it is not overflowing with something else. If it is too full, the moon cannot be reflected. If it is just right, the moon rests within. He remembered the temple veranda, the drop of water sparkling on a bamboo leaf, the master's very first words. He lifted the cup, took a sip, held it on his tongue, and exhaled slowly. The moon above remained round. The moon in the cup remained soft. And his heart was empty and warm. No need for many ideas. No need for many words. That night, he went to bed early, placed a hand on his belly, and whispered, "Thank you to a cup that knows when to stop." Story 2. The Temple Bell in the Rain. That afternoon, dark clouds gathered and draped the mountain. The heavy layers of cloud were like thick, weighty cloth, hiding the sun that had been blazing a moment before. Distant thunder rolled, low and long, as if the air itself were trembling. In the temple courtyard, young novices hurried to gather the clothes from the lines before they were soaked. Wind rose and blew hard through the bamboo garden, knocking stalk against stalk with a hollow clack and a rustling whisper. Like the forest speaking in a secret tongue. The scholar, now returned to the temple for the second time since the story of the teacup, sat beneath the eaves and watched the sky change. He was different now, less hurried, less driven by chains of words waiting to be spoken. He simply watched the colors of the sky shift. When the first heavy drops fell, striking the tiles and bursting apart, he heard a sound that was both familiar and new, the sound of rain. It was not noisy like a market, not frantic like debates in a hall, but even, simple, tapping each leaf, each stone step, each weathered wall. The Zen master stepped out from his room holding a bamboo umbrella. He opened it, but did not hurry anywhere. He stood at the edge of the veranda, gazing at the rain, his eyes gentle as if watching a narrow stream. The scholar approached, bowed, and asked, "Master, with the rain falling like this, why does my heart feel lighter?" The master smiled. "Because you are letting the rain wash the mind, instead of forcing it to become sunshine." The scholar grew thoughtful. The rain thickened, its sound filling the courtyard. Suddenly, a peal of the bell rang from the pagoda tower. The first strike was deep and long, spreading through space and rising above the rain. Then a second, a third. The bell blended with the rain, creating a strange music. The scholar stood still and listened. Within the bell's voice, he felt a different kind of silence. The lively rain seemed to slow, making room for the warm, resonant metal to sing. The bell did not drown the rain, and the rain did not smother the bell. They supported each other, whole and complete. The scholar closed his eyes and let the sounds flow through him. Idle thoughts from the morning dissolved, leaving only the presence of rain and bell. The master spoke softly. The bell does not need to be louder than the rain, and the rain does not need to grow quiet. Both remain complete, because the listener's mind is what decides. The scholar opened his eyes, looked at the master, then back at the rainy courtyard. Suddenly, it made sense. For so long, inside him, there had always been the sound of rain and the sound of the bell fighting each other, worry pressing against peace, desire drowning out awareness. But here, he realized he could listen to both at once without rejecting either. And in the very moment he stopped trying to get rid of one, they naturally came into harmony. The bell continued to ring. Each strike spread like a circle across a lake, touching every corner of his mind. He felt that his thoughts, once crowded with words, were now becoming a wide surface of water, letting each sound fall in and dissolve. No more tightness, no more measuring. He sighed, this time with a breath as gentle as the rain itself. After the first round of bell tones, the rain grew heavier. Each drop fell like an arrow through the air, bursting into tiny splashes on the ground. Standing under the eaves, he watched the courtyard tiles gleam like a vast mirror. Rainwater streamed through the cracks, gathering into little pools. Each pool reflected the fading light of the evening sky, like fragments of broken glass pieced together. Through it all, the temple bell kept sounding, steady and unshaken, like a golden thread running through the chaos of the rain. The scholar closed his eyes and asked himself silently, if the rain is my scattered thoughts, and the bell is my stillness, can I live like the bell within the rain? The question offered no instant answer, but it planted something different inside him, not the pressure to solve, but simply the act of listening. For the first time in years, he allowed his mind to drift with sound without trying to analyze it. The Zen master stood beside him, saying nothing. He let the silence between them thicken, enough for the rain and the bell to do their work. Only when a round of strikes ended, leaving an echo trailing like smoke, did the master speak. "Do you hear the space between two strikes of the bell?" The scholar opened his eyes and nodded. The master continued, "Many people only wait for the bell to sound, forgetting that it is the space between that creates the rhythm. The mind is the same. It is not only thoughts, but also the silence between them." The scholar stood stunned. All this time, he had leapt from thought to thought, like someone running through rain only trying not to get wet, forgetting to notice each falling drop. He realized that if he paused, that silence could be a shelter, not an emptiness to fear. In that moment, he began to hear the smaller things. The drip of water from a bamboo spout into a shallow pool. The croak of a frog far away in the fields. The soft brush of a novice's robe against a wooden pillar as he passed. All had always been there, but now he truly heard them. The rain lingered a while, then softened, turning into fine threads that drifted slowly as if unsure. The sky brightened, and from the wet treetops, a few warblers began to sing softly. Their song did not drown out the bell, nor was it smothered by the rain. It joined in, like a small instrument entering the symphony. The scholar laughed quietly, not at anything in particular, but because he realized life was singing right in front of him. The master looked at him and nodded. The bell, the rain, the birds, each has its own voice. If you try to choose one and silence the others, you will grow weary. But if you let them all exist together, you will hear a greater music. The scholar pressed his palms together. "Master, I have lived like someone who chose only one sound and rejected the rest. I chased knowledge and pushed away stillness. I chose reasoning and forgot to breathe." The master smiled, knowing that is already one strike of the bell. The words rang within him, simple yet bright. His heart felt suddenly empty yet warm, like the temple veranda now, no longer storming, but still dotted with dripping water, each drop forming its own rhythm. He turned back and saw the teapot still sitting on the table under the eaves. He poured himself a cup, this time slowly, stopping at the right moment, then lifted it to his lips. The warmth spread through his throat, blending with the sounds outside, and he realized, peace does not need to be sought. It is already here, in each drop of tea, each fall of rain, each ring of the bell, only waiting for him to stop and listen. The rain had nearly faded, the last drops falling against the roof sounding as clear as the tapping of an unseen hand. The scholar sat for a long while. Before him, the courtyard shone with wet tiles reflecting the silver-gray sky. Behind him, the temple still carried the faint fragrance of incense. Within him, the restless waves he once knew had quieted, leaving a broad lake. The bell's echo still lingered in his mind, like a circle that had not yet faded. He thought suddenly, perhaps the bell never truly ends when the sound leaves the ear. It continues ringing inside, as long as one is willing to listen. He remembered his younger years, when each temple bell was nothing more than a signal of time. No different than a school drum or a church bell, everything reduced to just sound. But today, in the rain, he realized the bell was not merely metal ringing. It was a doorway into a deeper silence. The Zen master sat beside him and said quietly, "People often fear noise, but some also fear silence. In truth, both noise and silence can be teachers. The bell and the rain are never in conflict. The only conflict is in your mind." The scholar bowed his head, feeling the master's words like a mirror reflecting himself. For years, he had lived in the clamor of words, and whenever silence appeared, he felt uneasy, afraid it would swallow him. So he kept filling it with reasoning, with language, with endless debates. But today, he saw that silence could be an embrace, not a pit. The sky brightened further, pale light breaking through the clouds. Water still dripped from the temple roof, each drop sparkling like a bead of glass. He reached out his hand to catch one. The cool droplet vanished instantly against his skin, leaving a refreshing chill. Looking at his palm, he recalled the master's words, and thought, perhaps learning is not only about gathering, but also about letting dissolve. A young novice came out carrying a dry towel and handed it to him. He accepted it with a nod of thanks. Looking at the boy's innocent face and pure smile, he realized there was a kind of learning that required no books, the kind that shines clear and unclouded. He wondered how many years he had spent amassing knowledge, only to lose the simple smile of that purity. The Zen master stood and said, "Come, let us go to the bell tower." The scholar followed. The stone path led to the back, where a three-tiered wooden tower stood in quiet dignity in the wide courtyard. The rain had stopped, the ground was still damp, and the air was filled with the fresh fragrance of plants just washed clean. They climbed the old wooden stairs, each creak echoing in the stillness. At the top, the scholar saw a massive bronze bell hanging in the air, its surface covered in green moss and worn by time. The master did not strike it immediately. He simply stood and gazed, resting his hand lightly against the bell. Eyes closed, the scholar copied him, placing his hand on the cold bronze. Suddenly, he felt a faint vibration, as if the bell had never stopped ringing, its resonance too long to be heard, traveling instead into the palm of his hand. The master opened his eyes and said, "The bell has never ceased. Only human ears no longer hear." The scholar shivered slightly, sensing a deeper meaning in those words. Not just the bell, life itself is the same. It does not truly end when it changes form, it continues. Transformed. And he understood that inner peace did not always need to be created, for it had never been absent. The master lifted the great wooden striker and let it fall gently against the bell. A deep tone spread out, not loud, but wide as rippling waves. The scholar closed his eyes and let his whole body resonate. He felt the sound moving through his skin, touching his bones, and returning again, as if his body itself were part of the instrument. He exhaled, and in that breath, the sound of the bell moved with him. For a rare moment, he could not tell where inside ended and outside began. After that strike, they sat on the tower's top floor. The wind rose from the valley, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. The scholar remained silent for a long while, then spoke softly. "I have read many theories of meditation, but now I know that hearing a single bell in the rain is worth more than reading 100 pages." The master only smiled, eyes gazing far toward the overlapping mountains. He neither confirmed nor denied, but let the words dissolve into the open wind. Back in the guest room, the scholar sat and wrote a few lines in his notebook. But this time, his words did not crowd the page as before. He wrote simply, "Let the bell and the rain both be present. Listen to the silence between the rains." That was all. Then he closed the book, leaving a blank page after the words, as if to give himself space for quiet. That night, lying on the bamboo bed, he still heard the faint rain outside the eaves, mingled with the bell that a young monk was striking for evening practice. He whispered to himself, "I do not need to drive away the rain. I do not need to hold on to the bell. Both have their place." And with that thought, he slowly relaxed, feeling as if he were floating in a vast river of sound, without beginning and without end. When he finally drifted off in the echo of rain and bell, he woke the next morning with a strange feeling. His body was the same familiar body. The bamboo room just as simple as the day before. But his mind carried a wide open space, as if a great door had been opened. He stepped outside. The sky was clear, thin white clouds drifting across pale blue. Dew still clung to the bamboo leaves, sparkling under the morning sun. He stood a long while, watching drops fall from the tips of bamboo onto the ground, hearing them break into tiny sounds that seemed meaningless, until he gave them his full attention. Then he felt himself dissolve into their rhythm, quiet and clear. The morning bell rang from the tower, this time not mingling with rain but resounding through the crisp air. Its echo carried him back to the night before, filling his heart with deep gratitude. He remembered the master's words, "The silence between two strikes creates the rhythm." And he realized that this very morning, this cool empty air around him, was such a silence, one of life's pauses between movements, where he could stand without needing to compete, without needing to prove anything at all. The Zen master appeared along the path, carrying a bamboo basket, smiling as he called him to the garden. Together they picked vegetables, gathered leaves, and washed them at the well. The water was clear and cold, running through his hands, rinsing the dust from the leaves as well as the heaviness left in his heart. Each small movement rang in him like a bell, reminding him that attention could turn every daily act into a practice. As he rinsed the greens, the master sat nearby, watching the clouds with ease. The master said nothing more, yet his silence was like a living scripture. Every glance and every gesture enough to teach. The scholar felt he no longer needed more words of instruction. What mattered was being present in each moment, letting his mind rest from chasing the past or rushing to the future. When they returned to the small kitchen, the fire was already burning, wood crackling softly, smoke carrying a gentle fragrance. The scholar sat and blew lightly on the embers, watching the flames flare up, remembering the bell the night before, how a single light strike could spread through all space. He realized not everything needed force to move the heart. Sometimes one bell, one drop of rain, or one small flame was enough to shake the whole being. When the porridge was ready, he ate slowly, each spoonful plain yet warm, the sweetness of rice dissolving on his tongue. He remembered how often he had eaten in haste, thinking of work, of debates, of reputation. This time, he simply ate, knowing he was eating. Each mouthful was like a tiny bell, ringing softly inside him. At noon, another rain came. This time he did not hide under the eaves. He asked to stand in the open courtyard, letting the rain fall on his hair, his shoulders, his face. At first the cold made him shiver, but soon he felt a strange release. The rain struck the tiles, the trees, the roof, creating countless overlapping rhythms. He no longer tried to separate them. He listened to all of it as one great symphony. Within it, there were deep tones like drums, bright tones like flutes, and again the bell rang from afar, blending without losing harmony. He stood still in the rain, eyes closed, feeling himself as one note in that music, neither important nor prominent, only in its right place. The Zen master watched from the eaves and nodded slightly. When the scholar returned, drenched and dripping, the master simply handed him a dry towel. No scolding, no praise. The master's smile was like the bell itself, silent, yet resonant. The scholar understood that in the master's eyes, every experience had value, as long as one truly lived it. Evening settled in, the rain eased, and a faint rainbow appeared across the sky. The scholar sat at his doorway and wrote in his notebook, "Last night, the bell within the rain. Today, the rain within the bell. Tomorrow, perhaps I will hear the bell within my very breath." He set down the pen, leaving a long white space on the page, not rushing to fill it with words. He felt that the empty space had its own voice, the voice of silence. He smiled, closed the notebook, set it aside, and simply sat still, listening to the evening wind move through the bamboo. Inside him, a quiet transformation was taking place. For years, he had searched for wisdom outside himself. In books, in arguments, in reputation. Now he realized that wisdom could ring out from a single simple bell. From a sudden rain, from the space between two breaths. He no longer felt the need to hurry. Like the bell's resonance, it did not rush to the next strike. It allowed the pause to stretch. And that pause was what made the bell deep. That night, he sat by the window under a clear sky. Far away, the day's last bell sounded, its tone carrying long into the mountain night. This time, he listened not only with his ears, but with his whole body. With the open space in his heart, he felt that the bell did not end when the sound faded. It continued to ring inside the surrounding stillness. And he understood that this bell was precisely the awakening he had been seeking, not distant, not secret, only waiting for him to stop and listen. Story 3. The Farmer and Fortune and Misfortune. One autumn morning, before sunlight had pierced the white veil of fog over the fields, an old farmer led his only horse to graze on the patch of grass in front of his house. The village lay tucked in a valley, ringed by green hills. A dirt road curved past bamboo groves and fields of golden rice. People in the village called him Old Track, a gentle, quiet man who had spent his life with the land and with one faithful horse. That horse plowed his fields, carried his goods to the market, and kept him company on long quiet afternoons. But that morning, as he tied a loose rope for the horse to graze, it tossed its head, kicked up its hooves, and ran straight up the hillside, vanishing beyond the trees. Villagers hurried over, buzzing with talk. What bad luck! Old Track has lost his only horse. Life will be so hard from now on. They shook their heads in pity. Some even thought he would never have a chance to change his lot. Old Track only smiled, eyes following the path the horse had taken, and answered slowly, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" A few days later, when the sun returned after a long spell of rain, The runaway horse came back, but not alone. It led a whole band of wild horses down from the hills. The valley burst with excitement. Everyone praised Old Track's luck, amazing fortune. He lost a horse and now gains a herd. Others said, "This old man is truly blessed. He will be wealthy now." But Old Track stayed calm. Showing no great joy, he stroked his beard, breathed slowly, and simply repeated his usual line, "Good fortune or misfortune. Who can say?" Not long after, Old Track's son, a strong and energetic young man, tried to ride one of the new wild horses. The horse was still fierce and untrained. It bucked hard, threw him off, and he broke his leg. Villagers gathered again, sighing, "What bad luck. We thought the wild horses were good fortune, but they brought disaster to his son." They looked at Old Track, sure that this time he would be sad. Yet he only sat quietly under the eaves, his eyes untroubled, and said again, "Good fortune or misfortune. Who can say?" That winter, war broke out. The king ordered all able young men to the front. Families parted in tears. Old Track's son, with his broken leg, was exempt. The villagers murmured once more, "How fortunate! If he had not fallen, he would have gone to war. And who knows if he would return." They sighed over their own son's fate and looked at Old Track with wonder, as if he had foreseen it all. But Old Track only tended the fire, the flicker lighting the deep lines on his face. And again he said, "Good fortune or misfortune. Who can say?" The story seemed simple, but to the scholar, who happened to be in the village as he passed through, it was a profound lesson. He had loved to classify what is good, what is bad, what should be celebrated, what should be feared. Yet hearing Old Track repeat his phrase, a crack of light opened in his heart. Perhaps it was the rush to label good fortune or misfortune too early that made people suffer. If one paused and let things unfold like a river, the outcome would often differ from the first glance. The scholar fell silent, remembering the master's words about the space between two strikes of the bell. Now he felt that the old farmer's saying was another bell, ringing from everyday life. That evening, rain fell again. The scholar sat beneath the eaves, listening to raindrops on the tiles and the clatter of hooves from the herd in the yard. He closed his eyes lightly, and the words hummed within him, "Good fortune or misfortune. Who can say?" Each time he repeated it, the phrase stopped being a judgment and became a breeze passing through his mind, carrying away worries that had not yet taken shape. He felt no need to predict, no need to assert, only to breathe. Each inhale felt like welcoming the rain. Each exhale felt like returning the water to the river. In that rain, he drifted into deep sleep, cradling the echo of a simple, far-reaching wisdom. The next spring, when patches of pink peach blossoms opened on the hillsides, the village changed once more. A group of merchants from afar stopped by. Seeing Old Track's herd, they offered a high price to buy the horses. The villagers crowded around again, chattering, "What great luck! From one lost horse, Old Track will be rich and free from hardship." They urged him to sell, saying chances like this do not come often. But Old Track calmly led the horses to the fields, slow to answer, and said only, "Good fortune or misfortune. Who can say?" Sure enough, a few days later, one of the horses fell ill with a strange disease that spread to several others. The strong herd grew weak. Some died, The merchants heard and hurried away. No one wanted to buy. The village buzzed again. How unlucky. Wealth slipped away right before his eyes. Yet old Track kept his steady gaze and sowed seed with even hands, repeating, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" The scholar, who had decided to stay in the village for several days to observe, saw more and more how differently this farmer lived from everyone else. While the village was swept up in a cycle of elation and despair, hope and collapse, old Track remained like a still lake, receiving everything without resistance. The scholar realized that real strength was not in predicting the future, but in not rushing to name the present. He thought of himself, a scholar for many years, trained to classify immediately right and wrong, benefit and harm, fortune and misfortune. Yet in the old man's eyes he saw another kind of wisdom, the wisdom of letting go. One day, old Track's son came into the yard on a cane. His leg had healed, though he still limped. Looking at the remaining horses, he felt both sadness and regret. Seeing this, old Track smiled and said, "A healthy horse moves fast. A sick horse moves slowly. But both still travel in the same direction. People are the same. There is no need to hurry." The young man was quiet, and a light rose in his eyes, as if he had found a new path in his father's words. Standing nearby, the scholar heard and wondered. Perhaps fortune and misfortune are not the nature of events at all, but the human attitude toward them. Summer arrived, the heat pressed down, and the fields cracked from drought. Many families worried that the harvest would fail. Yet old Track's plot, thanks to the one strong horse that kept hauling water, stayed green. Villagers gathered again and praised him. "You are truly fortunate, in a drought, and your rice is still thriving." But old Track only shrugged and said, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" Just as he said, only a few days later a heavy rain burst over the valley. Floodwater rushed in and swept across many fields. The greenest paddies suffered the worst damage. Old Track's field was flooded too. But because it sat higher, the harm was smaller. People exclaimed, "How lucky! The field was not lost." Then others whispered, "But perhaps the remaining rice will not head in time." Old Track, as usual, sat leisurely mending a fish trap, untroubled by the talk, and repeated slowly, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" The scholar watched him, filled with a hard-to-name respect. He realized that life truly was like a mountain road, sometimes climbing, sometimes descending, sometimes in sunshine, sometimes in rain, never predictable. Trying to stick a label on every turn only made the journey heavier. But if one kept the mind steady, each step, whether on sharp stones or soft grass, could still be taken. He thought, perhaps wisdom is not in books at all, but in the way this old farmer lives. One night, with the moon shining bright above the ridge, the scholar sat talking with old Track. He asked, "Why do you always say that line? Have you never seen something clearly fortunate, or clearly a disaster?" Old Track smiled, crow's feet deep at the corners of his eyes, looked out at the moon, and answered, "I only know there is a moon tonight. As for tomorrow, rain or sun, who can say? I once thought losing my horse was a disaster. And then it became a blessing when the horse returned with a herd. I once thought having many horses was a blessing. And then it became misfortune when my son broke his leg. I once thought his broken leg was misfortune. And then it became a blessing when he was not taken to war. It keeps turning, like the moon waxing and waning. I do not need to name it anymore. I just watch. The scholar sat quietly. In his heart, the bells from earlier stories now joined with the old farmer's words, forming a strange music. He understood that no philosophy was higher than this simple truth. Life is always changing. And peace comes only when we stop rushing to label. From that day, he trained a new habit. Whenever something happened, instead of leaping to a conclusion, he told himself, good fortune or misfortune, who can say? Then took a long breath to give his mind some space. That night, the sound of horses neighing echoed through the valley, mingling with the insects in the paddies and the wind through the bamboo grove. The scholar lay down, eyes half closed, letting the sounds carry him into sleep. It felt as if old Track himself, with that short, unchanging phrase, had become a bell in the scholar's life, not loud, but steady, reminding him that every event would turn again, and that only letting go of labels could bring true freedom. Time passed, seasons turned, the village remained as peaceful as ever and yet never stood still. One year, a great flood roared down from the headwaters. Water covered the fields, sweeping away houses and livestock. People cried out in grief, calling it heaven-sent misfortune. But old Track's garden, on its high mound, became a temporary refuge for many families. His horse helped tow bamboo boats to carry people safely across the current. The villagers whispered, "How fortunate! Without that mound, who knows how many would be in danger?" Yet old Track rolled up his trousers, waded into the water, set fallen fences upright, and said the same line, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" When the flood receded, silt enriched his fields, the rice sprouted lush and strong, and a few houses on the mound had been undercut and needed rebuilding. What people had called a blessing became a burden, and what they had feared as a curse left a gift behind. The scholar, now accustomed to such composure, continued to watch each event unfold. He began to write notes again, not as a theory, but as reminders to himself. Each event is like a drop of rain falling on a lake, raising a brief ripple and then dissolving. He wrote, "Nothing is final, and nothing has only one face. Fortune and misfortune are only temporary names. Life is far wider." These lines were no longer arguments, but breath itself, the record of a mind opening. Another day, a fire broke out in the village. It started in a kitchen not fully put out and spread fast on the wind. People ran in panic, cries rising everywhere. Old Track's house did not escape. Part of the thatch roof was scorched, and a few tools were lost. People pitied him. Such bad luck. Years of saving, gone in a single blaze. But old Track calmly lit a new cooking fire in the part of the kitchen that remained. A few days later, because of the fire, he and his son cleared out the rotten posts and rebuilt the house stronger. Watching this, the scholar saw no resentment in the old man's eyes, only acceptance, as if even fire were just another passing guest. At harvest time, the rice turned gold, and the village rejoiced. "How fortunate!" people cried. "This year the heavens favored us. It is a great harvest." But soon the traders forced the price down. Produce piled up unsold, and joy turned to gloom. Villagers complained. Old Track only shrugged and said, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" Sure enough, a few days later, Another group arrived offering a higher price because other regions had poor yields. The scholar watched the strange turning of things, every event changing faces in a blink. And only those who could stand outside were not swept away. When Old Track's son married, the entire village came to celebrate. People praised their luck. What a blessing. The son who once broke his leg now has a good wife and never had to go to war. They drank and sang, calling it rare good fortune. Old Track lifted his cup and smiled. Yet he remained the same, saying, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" And indeed, not long after, the young wife fell seriously ill and had to stay in bed. Villagers lamented, such misfortune, so soon after the wedding. But because of her illness, the son did not leave the village and ignored the urging to travel for trade, avoiding a journey from which many never returned. Once again, the turning of things left everyone astonished. From a man who had once sought reasons, the scholar now found he was learning most not from books, but from the life of a humble, little-schooled elder. He realized that sometimes wisdom does not live inside an answer, but in refusing to rush to a judgment. On nights when he stayed in the village, he often heard hooves on the yard stones and wind along the thatch. And inside, Old Track's refrain returned like a chorus, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" The words felt like a key opening an invisible door, leading him into deep sleep, free from the weight of unfinished plans, unrealized schemes, and worries not yet born. He began to look at life the way Old Track did, as a vessel that held both sunshine and rain. Without clinging to one, without rushing to push the other away. And he found something strange. Precisely when he stopped naming events, life became far wider and far more peaceful. The years passed. Old Track's hair grew whiter, and the scar on his son's leg remained as a faint line. No longer painful but a reminder with every step. The village seemed calm, yet was never free of change. One winter, bitter cold came, snow covering the mountains, so harsh that many animals froze to death. Villagers wept and called it the most unlucky year. But Old Track's horses, kept in a strong stable with a roof, survived. People rushed to praise him. "How fortunate! Your herd still lives. You will prosper next year." Old Track only smiled lightly, his breath rising in the frosty air, and repeated, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" A few months later, it proved true. His horses plowed quickly. His fields promised abundance. Yet because the harvest was too good, the market price dropped, and his labor brought little. Villagers sighed, such misfortune. But even in that misfortune, Old Track had enough rice to share with struggling families. And the village grew grateful. The scholar, by now familiar with these strange cycles, only nodded. Truly, no event stood still on one side, and a mind that could smile was the real treasure. Another year, an illness swept through the region. Children coughed with fever, the elderly fell sick, and fear spread. Villagers called it calamity, the greatest misfortune. Yet Old Track's son, once lame from his broken leg, had grown used to staying home to help with lighter work, and so was spared the worst of the contagion. People sighed, so the broken leg of the past saved his life today. Old Track sat by sick beds, cooking porridge for neighbors, never showing pride, only calm, saying, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" The scholar felt shaken. as if hearing a far-off bell, reminding him that even suffering could carry within it a seed of grace. If only we did not rush to condemn it as disaster. In another year, Old Track's son and his wife had a baby boy. The village gathered to celebrate, calling it a great blessing. But the child was frail, crying often, and the young couple struggled. People pitied them, saying, "A blessing turned to misfortune." Yet a few years later, the boy grew strong and bright, becoming the joy of the family. The villagers praised again. Such fortune indeed. Old Track only stroked the child's hair, his eyes gentle as moonlight on the fields, and repeated, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" The scholar thought. Life was indeed like a winding river, each bend revealing a new landscape, and no one standing at one turn could know what lay ahead. Another time, Old Track's horses strayed and trampled part of a neighbor's field. Anger flared, and people scolded him, calling it misfortune. But from that very incident, Old Track and the neighbor rebuilt the fence together, and a deep friendship formed, lasting for life. The scholar saw it as another lesson. Often, what seems bad luck can grow into bonds of great worth. Toward the end of his days, Old Track grew frail, often sitting on the steps to watch the sky and earth, listening to horses neigh in the distance and children laughing in the yard. The scholar, now streaked with gray himself, sat beside him and asked, "After all these years, have you ever truly known what is fortune and what is misfortune?" Old Track smiled, closed his eyes, and answered in a slow, deep voice, "I only know that all things change. Fortune will turn to misfortune. Misfortune will turn to fortune. But if you let go of the label, you will see both are simply two faces of one flowing stream. You need only move with the stream. There is no need to know its name." The scholar bowed his head, filled with a strange calm. On his last night in the village, he lay in the wooden house, listening to the wind in the thatch, the distant hooves of horses, and in his heart the words echoed without end, "Good fortune or misfortune, who can say?" The phrase was like a thread stitching together all the events of life, weaving them into a wide cloth of existence. And in that echo, he drifted into sleep, light as a falling leaf, without concern for what tomorrow might bring. For he had learned the most precious lesson from the old farmer, to live fully in the present, not rushing to name, letting life tell its own story. Story 4. The Master and Disciple Crossing the River. Late summer sunlight poured gold over the dirt road leading toward a great river. A master and his disciple walked side by side, both in brown robes. One was old, his eyes deep and quiet. The other was young, still full of eagerness, following closely after a day of alms. The breeze carried the scent of ripened rice and the hum of insects in the grass. When they reached the riverbank, they found the water swollen and rushing. The bamboo bridge had been washed away by an earlier storm. Across the river, the road to their monastery was clear. But how to cross? As they stood looking, a young woman appeared. Her dress was muddied, her eyes anxious, hands trembling as she clutched the hem. She looked at the two monks and said, her voice shaking, "Venerable sirs, I must go home to care for my sick mother. But the river is too fierce. I cannot cross. Please, will you help me?" The disciple instantly turned away, unsettled. His teacher had taught him that monks must avoid intimate contact with women. But the elder master did not hesitate. He smiled gently, stepped forward, bent down, and said, "Climb on." He stooped, let her sit upon his back, and supported her arms lightly. Steadily, he waded into the river. The water rose to his waist, yet he moved with calm strength. The disciple followed, his chest roiling with conflicting thoughts, embarrassment, disapproval, discomfort, all boiling like a pot inside him. On the far bank, the elder master gently set the young woman down. She bowed, tears shining in her eyes, then hurried toward her village. The master only watched, silent, then turned and walked on. The disciple said nothing, but inside he seethed. They walked for miles, through fields, under bamboo groves. As dusk softened the air, cool wind blew, but his heart remained heavy as stone. At last, when darkness had fallen and he could bear it no longer, the young man burst out, "Master, why did you do that? As a monk, how could you carry a young woman across the river? Was that not breaking the precepts?" The master stopped. He turned, his gaze kind yet piercing, and said slowly, "I set her down on the riverbank long ago. But you are still carrying her on your back." The disciple froze, struck as if lightning had split open the night within him. His anger, shame, and confusion dissolved, leaving vast silence. The master's words were not only about what had happened at the river. They were a mirror for his entire life. How many times had he clung to burdens he no longer needed, carrying old worries, replaying past concerns, refusing to release them? He now understood, practice, and even life itself, was not about avoiding contact, but about not letting the heart be bound. The master had carried nothing, and so was light, but he, though he had touched nothing, was weighed down. They walked on. Night covered the sky. The moon glimmered through drifting clouds. Crickets sang in the fields, blending with the river's distant murmur, composing a lullaby for the world. In that stillness, the disciple felt his shoulders lighten, as if he had just set down an invisible basket of stones. He smiled faintly. His steps now followed the master without strain, moving as though in a gentle dream. And in his heart, the master's words rang like a bell in the dark. "I set her down long ago. But you are still carrying her." After that night, the master's sentence pierced his mind like an arrow through fog. On the road back to the monastery, each step echoed with a new refrain. "Put it down, put it down." With every breath, he heard the same sound, not from outside but rising from within. When they reached the monastery, stars filled the late sky, and the moon hung above the mountain like a golden lamp. The disciple lay on his bamboo mat but could not close his eyes. He thought again and again of his master carrying the young woman, and of that reply, simple yet vast as the sea, "I set her down long ago. But you are still carrying her." He realized that all his life, not just today, he had carried countless invisible weights, praise and blame from others, fear of mistakes, pride in knowledge, memories of what had already passed. Each was like a stone he had thrown into his pack without noticing, until the pack grew so heavy he could hardly breathe. In the days that followed, he worked beside his master, hauling water, splitting wood, sweeping the courtyard, chanting sutras. Each simple task whispered the same lesson: put it down. Carrying water reminded him of the way he had once carried nameless worries that bent his back. Splitting wood felt like cracking open his stubbornness. Sweeping the ground felt like clearing away years of dust from his mind. The more he worked, the lighter he became, like a dry leaf loosening from a branch, drifting free in the wind. One day, a villager brought a basket of fruit to the monastery. As they bowed, words slipped out. "You monks are so virtuous. Your practice must be strong." The disciple felt a flicker of pride spark inside, like a flame catching straw. But instantly he remembered his master's words at the river. He asked himself, "Am I carrying this compliment on my back?" He smiled, bowed in thanks, placed the basket in the kitchen, and let the praise fade like smoke from the stove. His heart stayed unburdened. Another time, while on alms round, a drunkard mocked him and threw clumps of dirt at his robe. Anger rose. He wanted to strike back. But then he saw again the image of his master setting the young woman down. He breathed slowly and thought, "I could carry this lump of dirt all day. Or I could put it down right now." And so he released it, walking on without looking back. The drunkard, stunned, stopped laughing, while the disciple felt lighter, as if he bore nothing at all. That crossing at the river was no longer just a memory. It became a living teaching, echoing through every breath. He realized that putting down was not only about placing a thing on the ground. It was about letting go of thoughts, judgments, attachments. If his master could set down a real person the very moment they reached the bank, then he too could set down the shadows he had carried within. From then on, whenever he felt heavy, he asked himself, "Am I still carrying this? Then let me put it down." Years later, the disciple himself became a teacher, traveling to guide others. Whenever he retold this story, he always repeated his master's words. At first, listeners laughed, thinking it too simple. But later, in the twists of their own lives, they remembered, and the words opened freedom like a hidden key. And he, each time he spoke the line again, felt his own heart grow brighter, as though hearing a bell ring across the long night. And one rainy afternoon, sitting by the window watching the river flow, he suddenly realized the river that day and the river today likely shared not a single drop of the same water. Yet the lesson of putting down remained intact, like an unchanging shore on the far side. He smiled, sipped his tea, listened to the rain tapping on the roof, and whispered, "I set the young woman down by the river long ago. And now I also set down each worry rising in my heart." That breath was light, warm, and enough to carry him into deep serenity. From the day he first heard his master's words, it was as though a small lantern had been lit within his mind, shining into corners he had once ignored. Each time anger rose, he paused and asked, "Am I carrying another invisible person on my back?" When sadness came, he listened to his heartbeat and remembered, "My master set her down long ago. Why am I still carrying her?" That sentence became a mirror, showing him all the invisible luggage people drag with them every day. One day, while chanting under the eaves of the temple, a sparrow flew in, fluttering wildly, crashing against the wall, crying out in tiny desperate sounds. The disciple rushed forward to catch it, but the master raised his hand gently, "Do not. It will find its own way." And indeed, moments later, the bird calmed, circled once, and flew out through the window. Watching, the disciple understood another layer of meaning. Sometimes even kindness can be another form of carrying. While letting go and allowing things to move on their own is also a way of setting down. At festival season, the surrounding villages grew lively, and crowds poured into the temple with offerings and money, asking the monks to pray for their safety. The disciple's heart grew restless, pleased at his master's reputation, yet uneasy at the gaze of the crowd. That evening he confessed, "I feel I have not let go. I still carried too many burdens inside." The master smiled kindly and replied, "Knowing you are carrying is already the first step to putting down. Do not hate the basket. Simply open it gently." The disciple said nothing, but within, a cool stream seemed to flow. He suddenly understood that letting go was not cutting off, but placing down with love. Another morning, as they went out for alms, a heavy rain began, the road turning to mud. The disciple struggled, his robe splattered, irritation rising within. He was about to complain aloud when he heard his master chuckle softly. "Rain is only another girl needing to be carried across the river. Do you want to hold on? Or put her down?" At once he laughed, and his annoyance vanished. Each drop of rain became refreshing instead of heavy. He saw clearly that whatever came his way, if treated as a burden it would be heavy. But if set down, it became freedom. Years passed. The disciple grew steadier. He still stumbled. There were times of anger, times of attachment, but each time, the words of long ago rang within him like a bell. "I set her down long ago. But you are still carrying her." Each time, he remembered, breathed slowly, and gently released. Once, a swindler cheated him of a little money. The villagers were outraged, calling it misfortune. He only smiled and thought, "I lost money, but gained a lesson. Let it go." With his mind no longer caught in gain and loss, heavy and light, his steps grew unburdened. When his own hair had turned gray, he often told this story to his own disciples. Each time he recounted it, he recalled the swollen river of that afternoon, the image of his master carrying the young woman across, the gentle eyes, and the words that had lit his whole life. Again and again, he reminded them, "We are all carrying too much, not on our backs, but in our hearts. Put it down, and your steps will be lighter." Then he would breathe slowly, as if setting down one more invisible weight onto the ground. On the final night before his passing, he still smiled and repeated the words for the disciple beside him. Outside, the wind moved through the temple roof. Bamboo leaves whispered, the river flowed, and the moon shone bright. In that silence, the disciple of long ago had finally set down everything. He was carrying nothing at all. Story 5. The oil lamp fading. One autumn night, in a small meditation hall roofed with dark gray tiles, the cool wind slipped through the wooden shutters, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers from the back garden. The only light in the room came from a single oil lamp on a low table. Its flame trembled, sometimes flaring bright, sometimes shrinking weak, like the breath of an old man. A Zen master sat motionless, posture upright yet gentle, eyes half closed, his face still as an ancient statue. In front of him knelt a young disciple, his eyes full of questions. For a long time, he had yearned for one final teaching, one answer to ease the restlessness that lingered despite years of practice. That night, he spoke, "Master, my mind is like that lamp, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, never steady. Please tell me how to keep the light shining forever." The master opened his eyes and looked at the flickering flame. He did not answer immediately. A sudden draft blew through the crack of the door. The flame wavered wildly, almost extinguished, then steadied and kept burning. The master asked, "Do you see? The flame is still there, even though the wind shook it." The disciple nodded, though unease remained in his heart. The master then cupped his hand around the lamp. The flame grew calm, shining steadily. He said, "Sometimes you must let the wind blow. Sometimes you must protect the flame. But the lamp remains a lamp. The light is already within it. You do not need to keep it burning forever. You only need to know when the flame needs wind and when it needs shelter." The disciple pondered, but another worry rose. "But Master, what if one day the lamp goes out completely?" The master gave no reply. He simply turned his gaze to the lamp, then closed his eyes. The room sank into silence, broken only by the faint crackle of the burning wick. Time passed. Oil in the dish ran low. The flame shrank, grew weaker, and at last went out. Darkness filled the hall. The disciple flinched, heart pounding. But in the darkness, the master's voice came, deep and calm. "The lamp has gone out. Yet do you notice the night is not entirely dark? Listen. The wind outside. The insects in the garden. The beat of your own heart. The light has not vanished. It has only moved. The oil is gone, but the moon remains. The stars remain, and the light within you remains. If only you will open it." The disciple sat breathing hard. Then more slowly. Indeed, once his eyes adjusted, the darkness was no longer frightening. It felt gentle, vast. Through the window, the moon had risen high, spilling silver light into the room, illuminating the master's face even though the lamp was gone. Suddenly, the disciple understood. Light did not depend on a lamp, just as peace did not depend on outer conditions. The lamp was extinguished, but the moon appeared. One door closed, another opened. The master smiled softly. "Do not fear when a lamp goes out. Fear itself is only another flame, and it too will fade. Remember, nothing must be kept forever. Within each loss, something else remains." Tears welled in the disciple's eyes. Years of searching seemed to dissolve into this single truth: to accept change. Without clinging, without fear. That night he sat long in the moonlight. He no longer felt a lack of light. He no longer wished for the lamp to be relit. A new flame had been kindled inside him, the flame of letting go. From then on, whenever he remembered, he needed only to close his eyes, take a slow breath, and picture the oil lamp fading, to know that nothing truly disappears. Everything only transforms, like the in-breath and out-breath of the earth itself. From that night, it was as though he had gained new eyes. The next morning, stepping into the garden while dew still covered the leaves, he stopped to watch a drop of water fall from a bamboo tip. It sparkled in the morning sun, rolled once, and vanished into the soil. He remembered the oil lamp, remembered the wavering flame extinguished, and realized the dew had not vanished, it had returned to earth. To water, to cloud, light was the same, human life was the same. In each disappearance was already continuation. The thought made him exhale freely, as though releasing an invisible burden he had carried for years. In the days that followed, when sweeping the courtyard, he watched fallen leaves carried away by the wind. One by one, each vanishing into the ground. In the past, he would have sighed and called it impermanence, loss. Now he simply smiled, knowing the leaves were not gone. They had become soil, fragrance, and the promise of green grass in spring. The death of the oil lamp had taught him about continuation, and he found peace even in change. One day, a villager passed away. Grief filled the village. Drums of mourning sounded. Incense smoke hung thick in the air. The disciple walked with his master to pay respects. He looked silently at the face of the deceased. Once, such a sight would have terrified him, reminding him of his own end. But now he remembered the oil lamp, the flame gone, yet the moon shining. The body was just a wick consumed. The light had moved elsewhere. He did not cry. He folded his hands, took a long breath, and inside whispered, "Nothing disappears. It only changes place." On their return, the master asked, "What did you see?" The disciple bowed. "I saw that the lamp still shines, only in another form." The master nodded gently, his gaze as calm as the moon. No more words were needed. The disciple knew his path was clear. As time passed, he began to pass the lesson of the oil lamp to others. Some asked, "How can I stop fearing when I lose something precious?" He answered, "Watch carefully when a lamp goes out. It is not darkness swallowing everything. It is darkness opening a new door for light to enter." Fear only comes because we are not familiar with change. But change is the very nature of life. Others asked, "How can I keep light forever?" He laughed, "Do not try to keep it. When you stop clinging, you will see light everywhere." One evening, he sat alone in the meditation hall and lit a new oil lamp. He watched its flame dance, not hoping it would last long, not fearing it would fade. He simply followed each small movement, the flare, the dimming, the wick burning down, the oil thinning. Each stage was complete in itself. When at last the flame went out, he smiled, stood, and opened the door. Outside, the moon was brighter than ever. He knew he needed no further proof. The oil lamp had given him its final lesson, and he had placed it forever in his heart. That night, he slept deeply. No dreams, no sudden waking. Within his breath, he felt light still spreading, not from the lamp, not from the moon, but from his own quiet acceptance of letting go. From the night he witnessed the oil lamp go out, the disciple seemed to become a different person, not changed in any outward way, not with display or pride, but with a quiet transformation, visible only in each breath. He began to see all things as if through both flame and shadow, recognizing that both sides existed together, no longer fearing one over the other. Walking through the bamboo grove, when the wind rushed and the leaves shivered, he no longer felt it as disturbance. Instead, he noticed the pauses between gusts, steady as the rhythm of his own breathing. Sitting beside a stream, watching water crash against rocks and break into white foam, he remembered the wavering lamp flame that had gone out, and realized even in breaking there was its own kind of light. When he leaned over the well to draw water, he saw the moon reflected deep in the darkness, and knew that light did not depend on a lamp. It remained, even when the oil was gone and the wick had burned out. The master no longer needed to say another word. The final lesson was now alive in every gesture, every scene of life the disciple encountered. He learned to sit still when insulted, like a lamp in the wind, flickering perhaps, but still shining. He learned to smile when losing something, like the lamp's flame extinguished so the moon could rise. And when he looked into the eyes of seekers who came burdened by their fear of darkness, he would gently say, "Let the lamp go out, and you will see the moon." Each sentence he spoke was never meant to explain. It was simply to light another small flame, so that the listener might discover the light already within themselves. And as years passed, his hair turned white, his body grew frail, yet his heart absorbed the truth more deeply than ever. Life itself is an oil lamp fading. It does not need to be clung to. It does not need to be feared. One only needs to live fully through each cycle of brightness and dimming, so that when the flame finally goes out, one can smile and say, "The light has never been lost. It has only returned to the vast sky." Story 6. The Invisible Burden. It was a scorching noon at the beginning of summer. Cicadas sang endlessly in the flaming red branches of the flamboyant trees. A young disciple trudged wearily behind his master along a mountain path. His shoulders ached under the weight of a large basket full of freshly cut firewood. Sweat streamed down his back, soaking his robe. Each step felt as heavy as if sinking into mud. Halfway up the slope, he groaned, "Master, this road is too long. The basket is too heavy. I cannot bear it anymore." The master stopped and turned back, his eyes gentle yet firm. He asked, "Do you truly feel heavy?" The disciple nodded. The master smiled and pointed at the basket. "Is it heavy because of the firewood? Or because you have loaded it with countless invisible burdens in your heart?" The disciple froze, not fully understanding. "Put it down," the master said. He obeyed, loosening the straps and placing the basket by the roadside. Immediately, his back and shoulders felt light. His breath deepened. Even his feet seemed to gain new strength. He looked at his master, half surprised, half ashamed. "Do you see?" the master continued. "Just by setting it down, you're lighter. In life, how many times have you carried invisible baskets, fear, rivalry, praise and blame, and walked on, complaining that life is too heavy? Why not try setting them down?" The disciple remained silent, as if struck by a soft yet piercing blade. He recalled the many nights he had lost sleep worrying about the future, the countless times he had feared being inadequate, the anger that boiled up from a single careless remark. All of these, he had carried like firewood on his back, never once considering he could lay them down. He sat by the roadside, gazing into the deep forest. Leaves rustled in the wind, and he noticed that each leaf, when it let go, fell lightly. He sighed, and that breath seemed to open a wide space within his chest. The master said nothing further. He let silence itself surround the disciple, like an open field where one could finally hear one's own echo. From that day on, the disciple formed a habit. Whenever his heart felt heavy, he would ask himself, "What basket am I carrying now? Can I put it down?" Each time, he felt a little lighter. Life's road was still long and steep, but his steps no longer dragged. He realized that the invisible basket was what truly burdened a person, not firewood, not rice, not daily survival. After that first afternoon of placing the firewood basket down by the roadside, he began to see every situation in life as another basket he was silently carrying. One evening, as they returned to the monastery, a villager scolded him for supposedly dropping firewood on the path, causing a buffalo to slip. The words struck like a stone to the chest. Anger rose quickly. His face flushed, and he wanted to defend himself. But in that very moment, he remembered his master's words. "How many invisible baskets are you carrying on your back?" He took a long breath. He realized he was shouldering baskets of anger and pride. He pictured himself setting them down by the roadside, just as he had once done with the firewood. To his surprise, his fury softened, his heartbeat slowed, and he managed a smile while apologizing, even though the fault was not truly his. The villager looked startled, then calmed down. On the way home, the master said gently, "You have managed to put down a part of it." Days later, he faced loss. A young pigeon he had cared for many months was taken by a wild cat. He sat stunned beside the empty cage, his chest aching as though he had lost a dear friend. But then he asked himself, "Is this another basket?" Grief, regret, each like stones weighing down his heart. He inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and imagined himself bending down, placing that basket of sorrow by the roadside. When he opened his eyes, the sky was clear, bamboo leaves whispered, and he understood. The bird had returned to the open sky. While he must keep walking, putting the basket down did not mean forgetting, but refusing to let it bend his back. As time passed, he grew more skillful in recognizing these invisible baskets. When he felt envy stir upon hearing another monk praised, he saw the comparison basket forming. When his meditation was restless, distracted by thoughts of the next meal, he noticed the desire basket weighing him down. When tiredness whispered of giving up, he felt the doubt basket appear. Each time, he tried placing it down with a long breath, a small smile, or a gentle release in his heart, and each time he grew lighter, freer. Years later, when he himself became a teacher, he shared the lesson of the invisible basket. He never taught it as abstract theory. Instead, he had his students carry baskets of firewood up the mountain path. When they grew tired, he smiled and said, "Put it down." Then he asked, "Is it this firewood that is heavy, or the other baskets inside your heart?" In that instant, the young eyes would brighten, just as his once had. In his old age, his hair white as frost, he often sat on the temple steps, looking at the same dirt path where his master had once told him to set his burden down. He understood that from that moment onward, his entire life had been a journey of laying down basket after basket, until nothing was left to carry. And he smiled, knowing that one day, when the very last basket was placed down, he would walk as lightly as a cloud, unbound by anything at all. As years passed, he recognized more clearly that life itself was a series of chances to practice laying baskets down. One afternoon, passing through the marketplace, he overheard two men whispering that his practice was shallow, that he lived only in the shadow of his master. The words pierced him like needles, stinging his chest. His first impulse was to turn back, to defend himself, to prove them wrong. But just as his steps slowed, he heard, as if echoing within, "Are you carrying another invisible basket?" He stopped. He inhaled. He exhaled. He pictured himself setting down the basket of pride. Instantly, his chest loosened, his breath deepened, his shoulders relaxed. He walked on, leaving their words behind him like the wind brushing past his ears. Story 7, Shadow and Moon. It was a late summer night. when the full moon hung over the mountain peak like a great lantern of jade. The old Zen master walked slowly through the small village at the foot of the temple. The villagers respected him deeply. Often they would invite him into their homes for a cup of tea, eager to hear his stories. But that night, with the cool breeze carrying the fragrance of ripening rice from the fields, he did not stop at any house. He simply walked alone along the quiet dirt path. As he neared the edge of the village, a thief suddenly burst out from a darkened house, clutching a bundle of stolen goods. Seeing the master, the thief froze in fear, expecting to be confronted. But the master only stood there, his eyes calm, clear as a still pond. The thief trembled, uncertain what to do. The master slowly removed his outer robe, held it out, and said gently, "The night is cold, my child. Take this with you." The thief, stunned, accepted it with trembling hands. He could not find any words, and hurried off into the darkness. The Zen master continued his walk, climbing a grassy hill. There, he sat and gazed at the moonlight spreading across the fields. He whispered, "If only I could give him this moon as well." That night, the moon was so bright that his shadow stretched long across the earth. Swaying with the wind, he looked at his shadow and chuckled. Robes may be lost, possessions may be lost, but who can take away a shadow? Who can steal the moonlight? All worldly belongings, however precious, are only like a robe on a chilly night, something that can be given away at any moment. What no one can take is what truly belongs to us: serenity of heart, clarity as radiant as the moon above. The next morning, his disciple heard the story and could not understand. He asked, "Master, why would you give your robe to a thief? He deserved to be caught, punished, corrected. Why would you help him?" The master smiled, his gaze resting on the pale morning moon still lingering in the sky. "If I kept it, his heart would only grow darker. If I gave it, I lost only a robe. But perhaps he will forever remember something strange, something gentle. And who knows, maybe that memory will dissolve the darkness within him." The robe is gone, but the moon remains. The disciple fell silent. He followed his master's gaze. And indeed, the moon still shone, untouched by theft, untouched by change. From that day, the disciple began to see, whatever is given may leave our hands, but it lives on in the hearts of others. Whatever is clutched tightly eventually decays, weighing us down. More importantly, no one can ever steal true light, the light of a heart that has let go. At peace, shining like the moon in the sky. That night, sitting alone in the meditation hall, he watched his shadow stretch across the floor in the moonlight and whispered softly, "I may lose a robe, but I still have the moon." As for the thief, after fleeing with the robe, his heart pounded with fear of capture. But when he reached the edge of the forest, he stopped, breathless, and slumped under a tree. In his hands was the master's robe, worn but still warm from his body. He stared at it, bewildered. All his life he had stolen, and only ever met with curses and hatred. Never had anyone given him something freely, especially not with such calm kindness. He remembered the master's face in the moonlight, serene and unclouded by anger. His eyes stung. For the first time in years, he felt shame, regret, and also an unfamiliar lightness. Hugging the robe, he realized it was not a gift for his body alone, but for his heart. From that night onward, he never stole again. The villagers later saw him working as a hired hand, plowing fields, living simply yet at peace. No one knew the reason, but in his heart, the image of the Zen master and those silent words, "If only I could give him the moon," had forever changed his path. For the disciple, the story lingered in his thoughts for many nights. He could not understand how his master had been so serene, and he knew he himself was still far from that freedom. Yet this very distance gave him patience to keep practicing, to keep reflecting. He tried little by little, whenever someone spoke harsh words. Instead of carrying them like a stone, he imagined his master offering a robe to the thief. He tried offering silence, or a smile. Strangely, the moment he gave something away, he no longer felt loss. Instead, his heart grew lighter, opening a space wide enough for moonlight to enter. Seasons passed, and the tale of the thief and the robe became a story told around the village. To children, it sounded like a strange legend. To the elders, it was a mirror for quiet reflection. And each time the disciple retold it, he felt a cool breeze rise within, as though he could once again hear the rustle of leaves under that moonlit sky. Slowly, he came to understand that shadow and moon were two sides of a single truth. Shadows are what the eyes can see, but the moon is what can never be taken away. Shadows vanish when the lamp burns out or the moon sets. But the moon itself always remains, sometimes hidden behind clouds, yet waiting to shine forth again. Wealth, praise and blame, even this very body, these are all shadows, appearing, vanishing. What endures is the inner moon, the serene, luminous heart that no one can steal. Many years later, after the master had passed away, the disciple would still sit alone under the moonlit sky and recall his teacher's words. If only I could give him this moon as well. He realized that those words were not only an expression of compassion but also a reminder. The most precious things cannot be handed from one person to another. They can only shine forth, allowing others to see for themselves. The moon cannot be given, but it can be revealed. And once its light enters someone's heart, it remains there forever, without the need for sermons or commands. From that night onward, the moon seemed to leave an indelible mark not only in the thief's heart, but also in the young disciples. He often pondered why his master had said, "If only I could give him this moon." At first, he thought it was only a beautiful metaphor. But as the years passed, he understood it as a doorway into truth. All the things we hold onto are like robes. They can be given away or stolen. What is truly luminous, truly free, truly beyond theft is the moon itself. So whenever anger, envy, or fear stirred within him, he closed his eyes and pictured the bright full moon hanging high in the sky, its light shining equally on all, belonging to no one, unchanged even when clouds passed before it. He reminded himself, a robe can be lost, but the moon remains. Fame can vanish, but the light does not leave me. And at that thought, his troubles would dissolve like smoke. Years went by, and the story of the thief became a village legend. The elders told it to the children, that once there was a master who did not capture a thief, but instead gave him his robe, and even wished to give him the moon. The children laughed at the odd tale, but as they grew and encountered loss, they came to understand. Some, when they lost everything to a failed harvest, remembered the story and found peace. Wealth may vanish, but the sky remains. and no one can take away the moonlight. Others, when wronged by neighbors, recalled the same story and chose not to argue, for arguments were only struggles over old robes. While above both parties, the moon still shone. The disciple, now gray-haired, often sat on the temple steps on nights of full moon. He looked at his shadow stretched across the courtyard, then up at the round moon above, and his heart filled with peace. He realized shadows shifted with his steps, long or short, bent or straight, but the moon never changed. Shadows were like the changing fortunes of life, rise and fall, gain and loss. The moon was the clear essence, never diminished. He smiled, remembering the thief, wondering where he might be, how he might be living. Perhaps the thief still kept that old robe, or perhaps it had long since worn away. But surely, what remained in his heart was not the cloth, but the moonlight and the kindness of a teacher. One night, a young disciple sat beside the old master and pointed at his shadow under the moon. "Master, is that shadow me?" The teacher looked at him, then pointed to the moon. "If you only look at the shadow, you will be sad when it is distorted, glad when it looks straight. But shadows always change. You are the moon, radiant, silent, untouched by the shape of shadows." The child fell silent, gazing up at the moon, eyes wide with wonder. In that instant, the light entered his heart, planting a seed that would grow for a lifetime. And so, the lesson from that moonlit night with the thief did not end with a single moment, but flowed on like a river, illuminating teacher, disciple, and countless generations after. Each time someone lost possessions, they remembered, a robe can be lost, but the moon remains. Each time someone grieved over a distorted shadow, they lifted their eyes and smiled at the moon. The light could never be stolen, for it had never been outside, it was already within each heart. As the years passed, the once young disciple became an old teacher himself, still living in the mountain temple, still walking the same dirt road through the village. He often sat by the window, listening to the wind in the bamboo groves, gazing at the moon. Whenever he saw his shadow across the courtyard, he remembered that night when his master gave away his robe to a thief, and whispered, "If only I could give him this moon as well." That phrase followed him like a refrain, resonating more deeply as he aged. He came to realize that his whole life, from youth to old age, was nothing but a journey of learning to discern between the robe that can be given away and the moon that can never be lost. So many times he had been pulled into the whirlpool of gain and loss, praise and blame, but whenever he remembered that moonlit night, everything appeared like shifting shadows, changing, twisting, and dissolving at dawn. Only the moon remained, silent and whole. The villagers continued to tell the story to their children, as a simple reminder of letting go. Some, in times of hardship, resisted the urge to steal, recalling that there was once a teacher who gave even to a thief. And they told themselves, "If I can be content, I still have the moon." Some, in times of injustice, remembered the moon and refrained from quarreling, letting their hearts be light as the breeze. The story spread like moonlight itself, shining everywhere, owned by no one, extinguished by nothing. One evening near the end of his life, the old teacher sat on the temple steps, gazing at the radiant full moon. Surrounded by his disciples, he whispered, "My children, robes may tear, shadows may twist, But the moon never disappears. People may take what is in your hands, but they cannot steal what is in your heart. Remember, the moon does not need to be held. You need only look up, and it is there. Then he closed his eyes, his breath softening. The moon still shone. His shadow stretched long across the courtyard, as though to repeat the ancient lesson one last time. His disciples sat in silence, hearts overflowing with a deep tenderness. Their teacher had gone, but the moon remained, the light remained, and the lesson of giving without losing would shine forever. From that day on, whenever the village had a bright moonlit night, the people gathered to retell the story of the robe and the thief. The children listened with wide eyes, the grown listened with quiet hearts. And each one, lifting their gaze to the moon, realized, shadows at their feet are fleeting, but the light above and within belongs to eternity. Story 8. The Overflowing Teacup. One autumn morning, with mist still blanketing the temple courtyard and red maple leaves scattered across the wooden steps, a renowned scholar from afar came to see an elderly Zen master. The scholar was famous for his learning, had written many books, given many lectures, and was respected by the world. Yet inside, he carried a constant unease. The more he learned, the heavier his heart felt, the harder it was to find peace. He believed the master could give him a secret to rest in tranquility. So he traveled a long way to arrive. When he met the master, he bowed respectfully, then launched into a torrent of words, displaying his knowledge, citing scriptures, comparing Eastern and Western philosophies. His speech rushed on like a flood. The old master merely smiled quietly and poured tea. The scholar continued talking, not noticing that the cup before him was already full. The master kept pouring. Tea spilled over the rim, flowed across the wooden table, and dripped onto the floor. Startled, the scholar cried out, "Master, the cup is full. Why pour more? It cannot hold another drop." The master set down the pot, looked into his eyes, and said gently, "When the cup is full, there is no room for fresh tea. In the same way, when your mind is filled with knowledge, arguments, and fixed views, how can there be space for stillness to enter? If you wish to learn, you must first empty your cup." The scholar was stunned into silence. The words struck his mind like a bell, shaking the pride he had carried in with him. He sat quietly, and for the first time in many years, he had nothing to say. He looked down at the cup, where beads of tea still rolled over the brim, glinting in the morning light. His heart softened. He understood. For years he had been filling, and had never once dared to be empty. From that day, he decided to remain at the temple, not to learn by adding more, but by letting go. When sweeping the courtyard, he practiced setting down the crowded thoughts in his head, leaving only the broom and the falling leaves. When eating, he set down his knowledge of nutrition, leaving only the simple taste of rice. When listening to the wind, he set down his comparisons, leaving only the rustle threading through the bamboo. Each time he set something down, he felt a new space open in his heart, and in that space, peace began to appear. Many years later, when he was old and his hair snow-white, he would tell his students the story of the teacup. He said, "I spent half my life filling up, and the other half learning how to be empty. When the cup is empty, any drop that falls into it is precious. When the mind is empty, even a morning birdsong becomes a lesson." Then he smiled. light as a falling leaf, leaving behind a simple teaching. Sometimes peace does not come from having more, but from daring to have less. In the first days of staying at the temple, he found it painfully difficult. He had spent a lifetime speaking, analyzing, proving. Now the master taught him to sweep, cook, and carry water. Each time he held the broom, he wondered, what is there to learn in this? Then he remembered the overflowing cup and reminded himself, this too is a chance to be empty. He tried sweeping without thinking of anything, just watching yellow leaves fall, listening to bristles touch the stone. At first, his mind was noisy as a marketplace. Slowly, a strange quiet arrived, like a lake after wind. For the first time, he saw that a single simple movement could soothe his heart. At meals, he had once debated philosophy at the table, comparing East and West, Confucius and Laozi. Now the master said only, eat, and know that you are eating. He felt awkward, but tried. With the first bite, he realized the flavor that had always been there. Yet he had never truly tasted. He had always been busy speaking, busy thinking. The rice was soft and sweet, with a hint of wood smoke. He smiled, feeling that single bite was worth more than 100 books. One night, sitting in the meditation hall, he heard rain tapping steadily on the tiled roof. Usually he would turn it into philosophy, metaphor, and poetry. But that night, he tried to empty his mind and simply listened. Rain fell, paused, and fell again. No need to interpret, no need for meaning, only presence. In that moment, he felt his heart at ease, as though the rain itself was the answer he had sought for years. Day by day, he learned to set down each piece of invisible luggage he had once packed into his head. When questioned, he no longer rushed to argue. He often just smiled and let the question drift by like a cloud. When a novice made a mistake, he did not judge, but helped him fix it gently, seeing it as a drop of tea spilled from a cup, something to wipe away, not something to scold. He discovered that emptiness made room for compassion, and for peace. And many years later, sitting before his students with silver hair, he said, long ago I searched for knowledge everywhere, loading my cup to the brim. Only when it overflowed did I understand. Nothing more can be poured in unless you dare to pour some out. The first half of my life was for filling. The second half was for learning to be empty. And in emptiness, I found everything. He lifted his cup, took a sip, and his gaze grew distant and kind, as if that mouthful of tea held an entire life. Years passed. The scholar of old had become a white-haired monk, living quietly in a mountain temple. Visitors still came, some out of respect for his past reputation, others curious about the famous story of the overflowing cup. Whenever someone asked for the secret of practice, he did not lecture as he once did. He simply poured tea. When the liquid met the rim, he stopped, looked up, and smiled. If the guest watched closely, they understood at once. Knowing when to stop is the beginning of wisdom. If the guest did not understand and asked, he would tell the old story, his voice easy as a breeze, letting the listener find themselves within it. Some awakened at once, others needed years, but all left carrying a seed of emptiness to plant in their lives. In daily life, he kept to the same simple habits as in his early training: sweeping, carrying water, splitting wood, cooking rice. Young disciples often asked, "Master, Why do you still do heavy work?" He laughed. "Each time I sweep, I pour out what remains in the cup. If I do not sweep, dust will thicken, and the cup will fill again." To him, no task was small. Every motion was a chance to let go of pride, to let go of craving, to let go of the fear of imperfection. Sometimes he sat alone in the meditation hall, listening to wind pass through the leaves, remembering his years roaming everywhere for knowledge. He saw that the man he had been was exactly like a brimming cup, with no space for even a drop of peace. Thanks to the master's hand, thanks to that one overflow, he learned to pour some out. And he smiled, because now, in emptiness, anything, a patter of rain, a rising moon, a bird's song, was enough for him to feel complete. As evening years approached, he told his students, "Do not rush to fill up. Whatever is full will overflow. Only when empty are you truly vast. And when you are empty, you will see that nothing more is needed." He lifted his cup, took a small sip, and closed his eyes, as if the whole universe had folded into that taste. On the day he departed, the first chill of winter lay over the mountains. Disciples gathered around him, many in tears. He opened his eyes one last time, glanced at the teacup by his bed, and smiled as softly as wind. The cup is empty, and in emptiness, I see the moon. Then he closed his eyes, his breath dissolving into stillness. Outside, the gray clouds suddenly parted, revealing the gentle light of the early winter moon, shining across the meditation hall. His students looked at one another and understood. The master was not gone. His light remained, like the moon in the sky, like the spaciousness within every cup not yet filled. From the day he was awakened by his teacher with a brimming cup of tea, the scholar gradually became a different person. He no longer hurried to fill himself with knowledge but patiently learned how to let his mind be empty. The story of him spread throughout the region, and people came to the temple not to hear philosophy but to witness how he lived. One day, a wealthy merchant visited, sat down, and asked, "I have too many tasks, too much wealth, yet my mind is still empty. What must I do?" The scholar only poured tea when the cup was about to overflow. He stopped, then set the teapot aside and smiled. "You see, stopping before the tea overflows is already an art." The merchant fell silent and from then on learned to let go of ambition and to find joy in the simple things. Another time, a poor farmer came to the temple and complained that he was suffering from deprivation. The scholar invited him to have tea, but only poured half a cup. The farmer was surprised. "Why do you not fill the cup?" He replied, "Half a cup is still enough to drink, and it leaves room for more when the opportunity arises." Our mind is the same, not full but not lacking. Knowing contentment is peace. The farmer awakened, returned to his fields, and from then on worked happily without complaint. Thus, the lesson of the teacup was not just an anecdote but became a way of life. Everyone who came to the temple witnessed how he used tea to teach. Sometimes he poured until it overflowed to remind people to let go. Sometimes he poured half to remind them to know enough. Sometimes he did not pour at all to remind that emptiness is another form of fullness. Gradually, it became clear that he was no longer a learned scholar but a humble person, silently letting his life become a teacup for others to reflect upon. When he grew old and sat on the temple porch watching the rain fall, He often remembered that morning years ago when water overflowed the rim of the cup and upended the scholar's ego. He silently thanked his teacher for teaching him that lesson. Now, as he was about to leave this world, he only hoped to leave his students an empty cup. He told them, "If you want to keep my light, do not add more, make it empty. Because it is within that emptiness that you will see everything." And when he closed his eyes for the last time, there were no more lectures, no more sutras, just an empty teacup placed before him. The disciples knelt around, looked at that teacup, and each understood. The Master's life was the teacup, once full, once overflowing, and finally returned to emptiness. Outside, the moon faded behind clouds. But within their hearts a light kept shining, like the lingering fragrance of tea in the night, never fading. One early morning, when mist still wrapped the small temple on the mountainside and the space was so quiet that one could hear bamboo leaves brushing each other, a novice monk woke earlier than usual. The night before he had tossed and turned, his heart full of tangled thoughts about his path of spiritual study, whether he was capable, whether he was on the right path, whether all his efforts would be in vain. Those questions weighed on him like carrying an invisible stone. Stepping into the courtyard, the cold mist seeped through his robe. He looked up at the sky. Still dim in the darkness, the sky like a thick gray curtain. He let out a soft sigh, thinking that even the universe was weary with him. But at that moment, from the tall temple tower, a long, clear bell rang. That sound, pure and strong, spread through the mist and touched each leaf, each stone, each droplet of dew on the roof tiles. The novice stood still, his chest trembling with each echo. At first he heard with his ears, but gradually he felt with his whole body. The bell's sound seemed to travel through his bones, through his blood, through his breath, gradually melting away those heavy thoughts. He realized that all those questions were only like mist, present, dense. But when the bell rang, they dissolved. Each ringing was followed by a long silence. And it was in that silence that he heard the peace he had never noticed before. When the bell finished, the mist began to thin, and the first light of dawn shone down, tinting the tips of bamboo with gold. The novice clasped his hands, bowed his head, and gave thanks, the silent bell reminding him more profoundly than any sermon. From then on, each morning when he heard the bell, he no longer listened out of habit but listened as if an invisible teacher was knocking on his heart. Do not let worries fill your mind. Let silence have space within you. Many years later, when he had grown, the novice once told his disciples, "That day I learned that the bell does not just ring with sound. It rings with the emptiness between the strokes. It is within that stillness that we find serenity." The students listened, their hearts instantly calmed, as if a bell was ringing right within their chest, though around them was silence. That simple yet profound lesson became their lifelong companion. Whenever their hearts were troubled, they only needed to close their eyes, take a deep breath, and imagine the bell ringing in the morning mist, and everything would gently fade away. Since that morning when he heard the bell dissolve into mist, the novice no longer felt alone in his anxieties. Whenever his mind was disturbed, he would simply stop, close his eyes, listen, and even if the bell did not ring, its long, resonant echo still lingered within his heart. Once, when scolded by his teacher for dropping his bowl at mealtime, His face flushed and his heart sank. But instead of letting shame overwhelm him, he inhaled deeply, remembered the clear ringing sound from that morning, and imagined the bell gently knocking on his heart. Surprisingly, that heaviness melted away, leaving gentle silence. He bowed and apologized, and saw his teacher smile. At that moment he understood. The bell does not need always to ring from the tower. It can sound within the heart whenever one wills it. Then came a rainy season. With storms and wind, the temple drowned in gloomy clouds, and people's hearts easily fell into discouragement. Many nights he lay listening to the wind howl, feeling fear, as if the world was collapsing. But when morning came and the familiar bell rang, that sound seemed to tear apart the clouds within his heart. He looked into the courtyard. Raindrops clung to leaves and glimmered under the weak light. And he realized, no darkness can resist the rhythm of light. It is in the storm that the bell rings the loudest, the strongest, and he saw that he too could stand firm, if he knew how to let go of fear and listen. Years passed. The novice matured and faced more challenges. Once a fellow monk companion left abruptly, leaving deep anguish. He sat all night in the meditation hall, reflecting on loss, on friendship thought to be eternal but which dissolved. Yet when dawn broke and the first bell tolled, he suddenly felt his heart lighten. The bell could not stop the departure, but it reminded him that any emptiness can hold light, a lost friendship. But silence remained, and within that silence, he discovered a broader friendship with the sky, with the earth, with each resonant sound. Later, when he himself became the one ringing the bell, standing within the tower striking each note, he felt more than ever. Each bell not only rings outward, but resonates inward too. He felt his hand touch the bell metal, but it was his heart that was vibrating. In that moment, he understood that over the years the bell had taught him something great. Happiness does not lie in finding answers to all anxieties, but in allowing emptiness where echoes may find home. And so, for the rest of his life, whenever his heart was stirred or whenever someone came seeking the way, the novice, now a master, would simply smile and say, "Listen to the bell. If the bell has not rung, then listen to the silence, because silence is also a kind of bell." As the years passed, the young novice became a mature monk. His face no longer bore the innocence of youth but was marked with thoughtful wrinkles. Yet each early morning, when the mist still blanketed the temple roofs and the first bell of the day rang out, he would feel his heart return to that same boy, standing still in the cold, hearing for the first time the sound that melted the fog within his chest. He understood then that the bell was not just a signal of time. It was a friend, a teacher, a mirror that reminded him of emptiness. Many times, in the busy work of temple life, he would get entangled, someone arguing over trivial matters, someone neglecting their duties. Even he, at times, would feel frustration and the urge to reprimand. But right at that moment, the bell would ring. Its echo felt like a hand resting gently on his shoulder, whispering, "Pause, let the emptiness speak." He would exhale deeply, wrap his anger in silence, and smile as he calmly resolved the situation. One day, a young disciple asked, "Master, why does the bell make me feel at peace?" He did not answer immediately, but led the disciple to the bell tower and stood with him as he struck the bell. When the first note rang out, he asked, "What do you hear?" The disciple replied, "I hear the ringing of metal." The master shook his head. "You have not heard everything yet. Just wait." They stood in silence, and when the echo faded, there was only stillness. The master asked again, "Now what do you hear?" The disciple hesitated. "Nothing at all." The master smiled. "It is that nothing at all where the mind finds rest. The bell only opens the door. Peace comes from the silence that follows." That simple teaching left a deep impression, one the disciple would never forget, and would later pass on to many others. In his later years, his hair turned white, his steps grew slower, but he still kept his habit of climbing the bell tower each morning to strike the bell himself. The villagers knew, as long as the deep, resonant bell rolled across the valley, the master was still well. Many people woke early just to hear it, saying that each ring seemed to brush away the dust in their hearts. A poor farmer, anxious every season when crops failed, would find strength to continue his work just by hearing the morning bell. A young widow, overwhelmed by grief, would feel soothed when the bell echoed across her rooftop, as if someone were whispering, "Loss is just like the mist, it too will fade." In his final days, as his body grew weaker, he knew his time was near. One cold winter morning, when the fog was thicker than ever, he insisted on climbing the bell tower one last time. His disciples tried to stop him, but he smiled gently. "This time, I want to strike the bell with my own hands, to remind myself and all of you that the bell never disappears." With trembling hands, he struck it softly. The sound was not grand like before, but it was strangely warm. As the final tone faded into the mist, he closed his eyes and whispered, "I go with the bell." His disciples wept, but in that silence, each of them felt their hearts grow lighter. From then on, every time the bell rang in the morning mist, they felt as if the master was still there, in the endless resonance. Story 10. The Raft Across the River. One midday under soft sunlight, the dusty path leading to the riverbank shimmered with golden light. A group of disciples followed their master on a pilgrimage. They reached a wide, fast-flowing river with no bridge and no boat in sight. The group stood puzzled, looking across to the other side, where the path continued toward a village they needed to visit. The master said nothing. He simply looked around and then instructed, "Gather bamboo and leaves. We shall build a raft." The disciples rolled up their sleeves and got to work, chopping bamboo, tying rope, and weaving leaves into a raft. Sweat poured down their faces, but their hearts were joyful, knowing this raft would carry them across. Once it was finished, everyone climbed on, used poles to push, and finally made it safely to the other side. The group cheered and thanked the raft. But just as they set foot on dry land, some of the disciples began discussing, "This raft is precious. It helped us cross the river. We should keep it in case we need it again." One suggested carrying it along. Another proposed tying it to their backs, but everyone agreed it was burdensome. The master smiled, sat beneath a tree on the riverbank, and said, "My dear students, the raft was indeed useful while we were on this side. But now that we have crossed, carrying it further will only weigh us down. Leave it here for someone else to use. We must continue with free hands." The disciples fell silent. They watched the raft gently bob in the current and suddenly understood. Gratitude does not mean clinging forever, but honoring something and letting go at the right time. like knowledge, like tools, even suffering. Once they have brought us to awakening, what matters most is the next step, not carrying the bridge on our backs. From that day on, in every journey, they learned to remember what had helped them, but no longer held on, and they realized how light it felt to walk with empty hands and an unburdened heart, leaving the raft behind to serve someone else on their own path. As they walked away from the river, the disciples still felt a touch of regret, remembering the effort they had poured into building the raft, cutting bamboo, tying ropes, pushing across the water. But as they stepped onto dry ground, with nothing on their shoulders or backs, they finally understood what it meant to be light. Each step no longer dragged, their breathing grew deeper. A strange gratitude arose for the raft that had served its purpose, and for the Master's words that had freed them from unnecessary burdens. Along the road, a young disciple could not help asking, "Master, if the raft was so valuable, why not keep it? What if we need it again someday?" The Master smiled, his eyes kind and calm like a still lake. "My child, there are things in life that are only useful in certain moments. If you hold on after their time has passed, they become burdens. A raft is for crossing rivers, not for carrying up mountains. Teachings are the same, tools are the same, even pain is the same. They help you grow, but if you carry them forever, you will never be free." The group fell silent. Only the cicadas chirped, and in that silence, they slowly understood. Not everything precious must be kept. Sometimes, letting go is the deepest form of gratitude. A few days later, they came upon a small village where the people were still struggling to figure out how to cross the river. And the very raft they had left behind now became a lifeline, helping the villagers get across. The bright smiles on those faces became living proof of their Master's words. What we let go at the right time becomes a gift for the world. From then on, whenever the disciples found it hard to let go of a success, a belief, a memory, they would remember the raft, the feeling of empty shoulders, and they would practice putting things down so their steps could be lighter on the long road ahead. Since the day they left the riverbank, the image of the raft stayed with them like a stone dropped in a still pond, its ripples spreading in their hearts. Each one, during their travels, at times became burdened again, and they would recall the Master's words, "The raft is for crossing the river, not for carrying up the mountain." Once, in a village, the locals begged them to stay longer, to build a shelter and teach, promising offerings and reverence. Some younger disciples were tempted, thinking it was a chance to settle down and stop wandering. But the moment that thought arose, they remembered the raft, useful, convenient, but heavy if carried, and they realized this invitation was another kind of raft. So they gave thanks, then continued on their way, leaving attachment behind, their hearts lighter. Another time, they encountered a rude man who insulted them. One disciple felt anger rising and wanted to retaliate. But then he thought, "His words are like the raft, only meant to help me see where I am still attached. If I carry them, they will weigh me down the whole way. If I leave them, they will stay where they are and not follow me." With that, his anger dissolved like clouds. Years later, when they looked back, they no longer saw the bamboo and leaf raft on the riverbank, but saw the raft in many forms: a success, a fear, a memory, an idea, and the greatest lesson they realized was this: no raft, no matter how valuable, needs to be carried forever. Life is a series of rivers. And to keep moving forward, we must let go of what has passed, so our steps are unburdened. Our hands are free, and our hearts open to the endless journey ahead. Story 11. The Lamp in the Wind. One winter night, the cold northern wind swept fiercely through the bamboo grove, making the temple roof rustle softly. In the meditation hall, only a single oil lamp flickered faintly. A young novice sat nearby, huddled in his thin robe, eyes fixed on the trembling flame. The wind slipped through the cracks in the door, causing the flame to sway, sometimes glowing bright, other times on the verge of dying out, making the novice feel more and more uneasy. In his heart, he wondered, this little lamp is so fragile. One gust of wind could blow it out. How long can it possibly keep shining? Just then, the master entered, his brown robe flowing gently, his demeanor calm and composed. Seeing the novice's worried face, he sat beside him and asked, "What are you looking at?" The novice replied, "I am afraid the lamp will go out, Master." The master smiled, remained silent for a moment, then softly said, "If your heart is like a lamp with no protection, then the winds of life will extinguish it at any moment. But if your heart knows how to protect itself, like a lamp with a cover, then the wind may make the flame dance, but it cannot put it out. The wind is the world. The flame is your heart. The wind will always blow. But whether the light stays or goes, that is up to you." The novice sat still, looking again at the flame. Indeed, the wind still howled, but the lamp had not gone out, it only flickered, like it was dancing. That scene became a more vivid teaching than any formal lesson. From that day on, whenever the novice faced hardship, being scolded, misunderstood, or failing at something, he no longer panicked as he once did. Instead, he reminded himself, "This is just the wind. My job is to protect the flame. Do not let it go out." Years passed. He matured into a calm and steady man. Outsiders looked at him and thought he was as solid as a mountain. But inside, he knew he was only doing what the master had taught, guarding the flame. And when he grew old and began to pass down teachings, he would always remind his disciples, "Do not wish for the wind to stop blowing. The wind is life. Learn to keep your lamp burning in the wind." After that winter night, the image of the lamp swaying in the wind became a lasting memory etched into the novice's heart, a silent reminder that followed him through the years. Whenever things got difficult, he would remember the master's kind eyes and those simple words. Do not hope the wind will stop. Learn how to keep the fire. Once, while on alms round in a village at the foot of the mountain, he was pelted with clumps of dirt and mocked by mischievous children. At first, his blood rushed to his face. His heart pounded like a flame caught in a storm, ready to flare up in anger. But then he slowed his breath, closed his eyes, and pictured the lamp beneath its glass cover, flickering, but not extinguished. In that moment, he felt himself no longer swept away. He walked on calmly, letting the laughter fade behind him. Back at the temple, he told the story to the master, who only nodded and quietly said, "Good, you have learned to protect the flame in the wind." Then came a year of crop failure. The rice fields withered, the villagers went hungry, and the temple too began to suffer shortages. Many came asking for food, and the granary held very little. The novice felt sorrow, even panic, thinking that the lamp of compassion within him was about to go out. But the master said, "Give what we have, however little. Share it." Again, the novice thought of the flame, even when the wind blows hard. It can still shine, if protected. So he and his brothers cooked rice and shared it with the village. Strangely, when the people learned that the temple had so little yet still gave, they came together, bringing what little they had to offer in return. What they feared would fade actually spread. Like a small flame passed from one candle to hundreds of others. He realized then, to protect the flame does not mean clinging to it, but letting it shine and spread. Years later, when he himself had become an old master with white hair and trembling hands, he sat beside his students during a stormy night, watching the oil lamp flicker in the meditation hall. Though the wind roared outside, he felt no worry in his heart. Slowly, he said, "My dear students, all my life, I have learned just one thing. The wind never stops. But the flame can still shine. If your heart is a lamp, then find your cover. That cover is mindfulness. It is breath. It is compassion. When you have it, the wind will only make your flame dance, not extinguish it." The disciples sat silently, listening to the wind outside, blending with the master's gentle voice. In that moment, each of them felt a flame in their own chest, glowing steady amidst life's storm. From the day he learned the lesson of the lamp in the wind, the novice always reminded himself that the path of practice was not about waiting for life's storms to stop, but learning how not to let his heart be extinguished. Many times, during long pilgrimages, the monks were scorned by people who believed they were lazy or living off charity. Such words were like harsh winds, upsetting some of the brothers. But the novice took a deep breath, recalled the swaying lamp from that winter night, and smiled as he walked on. He saw clearly. Praise and blame are like gusts of wind if you hold too tightly. The flame will go out if you let them pass through. The light will shimmer more beautifully. Another time, when something went missing from the temple, suspicion rose among the monks. The atmosphere grew tense. The novice asked himself, "Is the flame within me about to go out?" Then he found a quiet place, placed a hand on his chest, and listened to his breath, as if the breath itself was the cover protecting the flame. Strangely, the flame stood firm, strong enough for him to share his calm with his brothers. Years went by. The novice became a revered master. In every Dharma talk, he did not use lofty words. He simply told the story of a small oil lamp facing the wind. He said, "If you wait until life has no more storms before you seek peace, you will never find it. Learn to guard your lamp, even while the wind still blows." At first, the disciples were puzzled, but later, when facing real storms, losing loved ones, failing, falling ill, they finally realized that the old lesson was a light guiding their way. At the end of his life, when strength had faded, the master sat beside the oil lamp once more. The wind outside still howled, but the flame inside him no longer wavered. He looked at his students and smiled. "My children, the wind will always be there. But if your heart is a flame that knows how to shine on its own, then nothing can put it out." And then he closed his eyes, passed away in silence, leaving behind not a long scripture, but a simple image, a lamp in the wind, flickering, but never extinguished. Story 12. The Unfinished Painting. In an old temple nestled halfway up the mountain, There was a young monk who loved painting. Whenever he had free time, he would sit by the veranda and paint, sometimes a cloud-covered mountain, sometimes a bright full moon, other times an old bamboo swaying in the wind. One day, he decided to create a perfect painting to offer his master. It would have to include mountains, rivers, the moon, clouds, birds, everything blending together into a peaceful world. He painted day and night, then erased and painted again. His eyes were focused, his hand grew weary, but the more he tried, the more incomplete it felt. Mountain lines too stiff, water too still, birds not flying far enough. Frustrated, he crumpled up his work and started again. Days passed, then weeks. Paper and ink ran low, and so did his spirit. Seeing this, the master came and quietly sat behind him, watching for a while. Then he asked, "What are you trying to find in your painting?" The young monk sighed. "I want it to be perfect. But the more I paint, the more flawed it seems." The master smiled, picked up the brush, added a short stroke, then put it down. That stroke did not complete the painting, if anything. It made it look even more unfinished. The master said, "You see, an unfinished painting is the most perfect one. Because in that incompleteness, your heart still has space to breathe, to live." Then he stood up and left the painting on the table. The young monk sat silently, looking at the painting with his master's final, unfinished stroke, and felt a strange peace rise in his heart. He realized that his craving for perfection was the very wind blowing out the flame inside him. From that day on, he no longer painted to complete something, but to enjoy every brushstroke. When he put the brush down, he would smile and say, "That is enough." And somehow, those incomplete paintings held a strange vitality, because they left space for the viewer to finish it in their own imagination. Years later, he told his disciples, "Life is like a painting. If you keep chasing after completeness, you will always be exhausted. Only when you accept what is unfinished can you finally find peace." When he finished speaking, he gently closed his eyes, listened to the wind blowing through the veranda, to the leaves falling in the courtyard, and smiled, like a single unfinished brushstroke completing the final painting of his life. Since the day his master added that final, imperfect stroke, it was as if the young monk had let go of an invisible boulder that had long weighed on his heart. He kept painting, but no longer felt the need to include every moon, mountain, river, or bird. He held the brush like a child drawing lines in the dirt. Some days he would paint just a few strokes, then stop, enjoying the blank space more than the forms. Other days, the ink ran out mid-stroke, and he simply let it be, no restlessness. Because he had come to understand, even the pause is part of the painting. Gradually, he learned that beauty does not lie in perfection, but in the space where the viewer can still breathe. One day, a visitor came to the temple, saw a painting hanging on the wall, and asked, "Why did you not finish it, Master? Why leave it incomplete?" He smiled, "Because life is never complete. An unfinished painting is more like life. It always leaves room for clouds to drift, wind to blow, and the heart to wander." The visitor fell silent, as if seeing himself in the blank space. In his later years, the old monk still kept his habit of sitting by the temple veranda, painting a few strokes, but he never finished a single painting. One day, a disciple asked, "Master, Is it true that in your entire life, you have never completed even one painting? He smiled kindly. My whole life is an unfinished painting. And that is the most beautiful one. We humans keep wanting things to end, to be whole, but in truth, it is the unfinished that nourishes us, because it opens the door to the infinite. On his final day, as his strength faded, he held the brush in his trembling hand and drew one last short stroke on a blank sheet of paper, then let the brush fall. He looked at the painting, still without form, and softly said, "That is enough." Then he closed his eyes and passed away. His disciples gathered around, looking at the painting with just a few unfinished strokes. Yet in their hearts, it felt so complete that nothing more needed to be added. Because they understood. It was in the incompleteness that the Master's light remained, like the empty space in the painting holding a place for the infinite. Story 13. The Bamboo in the Wind. One late summer afternoon, a fierce storm swept through the mountains. Dark clouds rolled in, and strong winds roared through the bamboo grove in front of the temple courtyard. The wind howled, bamboo cracked and snapped, many young stalks were blown over. Yet in the midst of that wild storm, some tall bamboo remained standing. They simply bent with the wind and then straightened again once it passed. A young novice stood under the temple eaves, eyes fixed on the scene, a question rising in his heart. Why do the big ones not break, while the small ones do? Why is it that the flexible ones survive? When the storm passed, the Master stepped outside with a bamboo broom in hand and a gentle smile on his face. "Did you see the bamboo?" he asked. The novice nodded. The Master said, "Bamboo survives not by resisting the wind, but by yielding to it." In practice, strength is not always about confronting. Sometimes, true strength is knowing when to bow. The wind is life. The bamboo is your heart. Flexibility is what lasts. From that day on, the image of bamboo became a living lesson within the young monk's heart. Later, as he grew older, there came a time when he was falsely accused. In the past, he would have defended himself at all costs. But now, he simply bowed his head in silence, like bamboo yielding to the wind. In time, the accuser realized their mistake and came to apologize. The monk understood that sometimes, not fighting back is the strongest way to stand upright. On another occasion, during a difficult trial when many left him behind, he remained alone, seemingly unable to endure. But he remembered the bamboo. No storm lasts forever. What matters is keeping your roots grounded. And indeed, when the winds passed, he was still there, stronger than before. When he became an old master, he would often lead his students to the bamboo grove. As the wind blew through, he would say, "Do not fear when life becomes fierce." Bamboo teaches us that to bend is not weakness, it is wisdom. If you are too rigid, you will break, but if you know when to be soft, you will stand for a long time. The students listened in silence, watching the bamboo sway and sing in the wind like 1,000 voices. And in that sound, they could hear the Master's teaching. Live like bamboo. Know when to bow, when to rise, when to stand straight, when to bend, and nothing will bring you down. From the day he heard his Master's lesson on the bending bamboo, the young novice felt as if a door had opened in his heart. Before, whenever he was wrongly scolded, he would feel bitter and want to argue. But the more he spoke, the more exhausted he became. burdened by his own defensiveness. Now, he practiced silence. He would take a deep breath and imagine himself like a stalk of bamboo swaying in the wind. At first, it felt like mere endurance. But in time he realized that silence was not defeat, it was how he stayed unbroken. One time, when conflict erupted in the temple and monks divided into arguing sides, the novice, now more mature, sat quietly splitting firewood. Smiling, some thought he was indifferent. But in truth, he was softening his heart like bamboo. A few days later, when tempers cooled, the brothers reconciled and apologized. The monk had not spoken a word, but his calm presence, like the still base of a swaying bamboo, helped others reflect on themselves. When he came of age, the monk was sent on pilgrimage to various villages. Everywhere he went, he encountered the winds of life, the wind of poverty, the wind of anger, the wind of temptation. Once, in a village, he was invited to give a Dharma talk. But in the middle of his teaching, a drunken man burst in, shouting insults and throwing dirt and stones. The villagers were outraged, ready to drive the man out. But the monk simply bowed his head, hands pressed together, offering no resistance. The man stumbled and fell. When he sobered up, seeing he had not been punished, he wept and knelt to ask forgiveness. The villagers exchanged looks and realized it was gentleness that calmed the storm. Years later, the monk had become a revered elder. Each night, the wind still passed through the bamboo grove behind the temple. He would often take his students there to listen. "My children," he would say, "the winds of life never stop. If you want to be like stone, the wind will wear you down. If you want to be like iron, the wind will rust you. But if you become like bamboo, you can pass through it all without breaking." The younger students did not fully understand at the time. But later in life, when real storms came, when they lost loved ones, faced failure, or endured grief, they remembered his words. They remembered the sound of the bamboo. And they stood tall. In the end, when the master passed away, the wind still rustled through the bamboo grove, its whisper sounding like a farewell. His disciples stood silently. It felt as if he had not truly gone, but had become part of the wind, forever reminding them that gentleness is not weakness, but the strength that helps us endure impermanence. From the day he engraved the image of the bowing bamboo into his heart, the young monk reflected on that lesson through every moment of his life. Once, he was sent down the mountain to help villagers harvest rice during the rainy season. Suddenly, floods rose quickly, and people panicked, shouting, rushing to flee. Fear gripped him too, his heart racing. But then he remembered his teacher's words. Bamboo does not resist the wind, it yields to keep its roots. So he paused, took a deep breath, watched the water, and guided the villagers to higher ground. After the flood, some said, "We were lucky to survive because of the monk." He shook his head, "Not because of me. The bamboo taught me how to stand firm in the wind." From that day on, the villagers planted bamboo along the riverbanks, honoring it as a symbol of resilience. Years later, new winds came. Disciples disagreed, took sides, argued passionately, each convinced they were right. The old monk did not scold or intervene. Instead, he led them to the bamboo grove one windy night. The bamboo swayed and rubbed against each other, creating a chorus of sound. He asked, "What do you hear?" One said it was the bamboo arguing. Another said it was the bamboo singing. The master nodded. That is right. What you see is what the bamboo reflects. But in the end, when the wind passes, the bamboo still stands. None leave the grove, and you, too, must let the wind of arguments pass, while keeping the roots of brotherhood strong. Everyone fell silent, bowed their heads, and from that night, they made peace. In his final years, hair white as snow, the master often sat alone under the bamboo grove, listening to the wind as if hearing his teacher's voice once more. He knew that all the storms had come and gone. So many trials had passed. Yet he was still here, not because he was tougher than anyone, but because he had learned how to bend. In his final moments, as his breath thinned, he said to his disciples, "Be like bamboo, bow to stand, soften to endure, face the wind to understand strength. Do not wish for life to be still. Practice being the bamboo grove in the wind." Then he closed his eyes and smiled. Outside, the bamboo swayed, whispering like a gentle farewell. And his disciples understood that their master had never really left. He had become the wind among the bamboo, forever reminding them to live like bamboo. Story 14. The Drop on the Lotus Leaf. One early summer morning, while the first rays of sunlight had yet to cut through the light mist, a young novice walked out to the lotus pond behind the temple to fetch water. On the lush green lotus leaves, countless dewdrops shimmered like little pearls, glistening under the rising sun. The boy paused, captivated by each drop rolling across the surface without soaking into the leaf. He whispered, "How strange! Why does the water not wet the leaf?" Just then, his master approached, bamboo staff in hand, gaze distant, smiling. The master said, "You see, the water touches the leaf, rolls across it, but never clings to it. That is freedom. As practitioners, we live in the world, encounter countless experiences, but our minds must remain unattached, just like the lotus leaf does not hold onto the water." That sentence echoed in the novice's heart like the toll of a bell. From that day forward, he often returned to the lotus pond each morning, reminding himself, "Let joys and sorrows, praise and blame, gain and loss roll across your life like drops on a lotus leaf, glimmering beautiful, then falling into the pond, leaving no trace behind." Many times, when teased by fellow monks, he would just smile and think, "This too is only a droplet." Whenever homesickness rose in his chest, he would come to the pond, watch a drop slide off the leaf, and slowly, his heart would feel lighter. As he matured, the boy became a teacher who often used the image of the lotus leaf to teach his students. He said, "My dear ones, if a drop of water clings to the leaf will wither, and the water will become cloudy. If your mind clings to worldly matters, you will grow heavy. Let it roll away." At first, many students did not fully grasp his words. But later, when they experienced loss and sorrow, they realized this teaching was a path to freedom. In his final years, though weak, the master would still lean on his cane and sit beside the lotus pond, watching the early morning dew. One day, a disciple asked, "Master, when will my heart become like the lotus leaf?" He smiled gently and said, "Do not wait. The moment you stop holding on, your heart is already the lotus leaf." Then he took a soft breath, closed his eyes, listened to the wind stirring the leaves, and felt his life like one last drop, sliding off the leaf. not lost, but returning to the vast waters below. Since the day he first received that teaching, the novice carried the image of the lotus leaf as his guiding compass. When praised for being diligent or skilled, he would smile without letting his heart float with pride, thinking, "This is just a droplet catching the sunlight, it will fall soon." On the other hand, when scolded or criticized, he no longer sulked for days as before. He reminded himself, "This is just a murky drop, let it roll off the leaf." And so, his heart grew steadier, less swayed by the world. Years later, when he became a monk who traveled to teach in many places, he always carried the image of the lotus leaf with him. One time, a grieving widow came to him, her heart shattered by the loss of her husband. She cried, "I cannot let go." He led her to the lotus pond, pointed to a single drop rolling off a leaf, and said, "The one you love has not vanished. He has simply returned to the great water. Let the drop roll away, so the leaf may stay green." She fell silent, then cried again, but this time, her tears brought peace. Another time, a wealthy merchant came to him, anxious about losing his fortune. The monk brought him to the lotus pond too, and said, "Wealth is like dew. The more you cling, the heavier the leaf becomes. Only when you release it, can the leaf be free." The merchant was quiet, and from that moment on, lived more peacefully. In the last chapter of his life, the elder master often sat beside the pond, watching the dewdrops glisten under the morning sun. He told his disciples, "Do not wish for a life free of falling drops. What matters is to be like the lotus leaf. Let every drop roll away without leaving a mark." When you can release like that, you will feel as light as the wind, and bright as the sun. One autumn morning, wrapped in mist, he passed away peacefully. His disciples stood beside him and watched the last dewdrop roll off a lotus leaf, falling into the water, creating gentle ripples that spread outward. In that moment, they understood. The master had not disappeared, he had returned to the great stream. Like every drop always does. From the first morning he heard his master say that water does not cling to the leaf. The novice carried that image like a precious gem in his heart. Each day, he came to the pond and reflected on himself. When joy arose from praise, he looked at the dew rolling off the leaf and reminded himself, "This joy will also fade, do not hold it." When sadness came from being scolded, he watched the drop fall into the water and thought, "This sorrow too shall pass, do not let it leave a stain." And so the years went by. He learned how to keep his heart spacious, not letting the fleeting drops of life wilt the lotus leaf within. As he grew older and took on temple responsibilities, he encountered more friction, disagreements among brothers, tangled affairs, but every time he remembered the drop, he knew, everything will pass, nothing stays forever. That calm presence made others respect him. They came to seek advice, and he would simply smile and lead them to the lotus pond, letting the dewdrops speak more eloquently than any sermon. As a wandering monk, he shared the image of the lotus leaf everywhere he went. One young man, devastated by heartbreak, came to him saying he could no longer live with the pain. The monk said nothing at first. He brought the boy to the pond, handed him a lotus leaf, and dropped a few beads of water on it. The drops rolled off, and the leaf stayed fresh. He said, "Your heart is the same. If you let the sorrow sit too long, it will wither. Let it roll off, so it may remain green." The young man said nothing, but cried, and in that crying, found release. Years later, with silver hair, the master still kept his habit of watching the morning dew. One day, a disciple asked again, "Master, when will my heart be like the lotus leaf?" He looked at a shimmering drop and gently said, "The moment you stop holding on, it already is. No need to wait." That simple answer stunned the disciple. Like discovering that the treasure he had searched for his whole life had always been in his hands. On his final day, the master sat beside the pond. A drop slid off the leaf and fell into the water, sending ripples that widened forever. He smiled softly and whispered, "I too am just a drop, returning to the great stream." Then he closed his eyes, and his breath dissolved into the morning air. His disciples gathered around, but they did not feel he was gone. They saw him in the ripples, in the sunlight dancing on the dewdrops, in the soft rustle of wind across the lotus leaves, forever present. Story 15. The Shadow in the Mirror. One afternoon, as golden sunlight slanted across the temple veranda, a young novice was sweeping the meditation hall when he noticed an old bronze mirror hanging on the wall. In it, his reflection appeared vividly, his youthful face, eyes full of movement, behind him the wooden pillar and soft light. He stopped, gazing at the image, suddenly struck by a strange feeling. Which one is really me? He wondered. Is it the body standing here? Or the shadow in the mirror? The more he looked, the more the reflection seemed to have a life of its own, as if someone else were staring back at him. Confused, a sense of fear crept into his heart. If that shadow disappears when the mirror is gone, am I any different from a shadow? If this body fades one day, is it not also just an illusion? The master passed by and saw the boy standing motionless before the mirror. He paused and asked, "What are you looking at so intently?" The novice bowed and replied, "I see my reflection in the mirror, Master. And I am afraid, because I do not know which one is real." The master smiled, stepped closer, and pointed to the mirror. "The shadow in the mirror is not real," he said gently, "but it is not separate from you. It exists because of you, but it is not you. Your body too exists because of causes and conditions, but it is not your true self. To see the shadow and not cling to it, that is to see your true nature." The master's words struck the boy like a splash of cold water, clearing his confusion but also opening a vast emptiness inside. From that day on, every time he looked into a mirror, he no longer focused on the image. Instead, he used it to remind himself, everything in life is like the shadow in the mirror, visible, but not real. You can see it, but do not attach to it. When praised for giving a good talk, he would think, that praise is just a reflection, it appears, then disappears. When criticized for clumsiness, he would remind himself, that blame too is just an image, not a solid truth. In this way, he gradually stopped being tossed around by praise and blame. His heart grew still. Years later, as an old teacher, he often told his disciples the story of the mirror. He said, "My dear students, if you see your reflection and believe it is you, you will live your whole life inside an illusion. But if you know that a shadow is just a shadow, you will no longer be afraid. This body is a shadow. Fame is a shadow. Joy and sorrow are shadows. Do not try to erase the shadow, just do not cling to it." Some students did not fully understand yet, but the seed was planted. And later, during moments of doubt, they would look in the mirror, smile, and remember, the shadow is still there, but the heart no longer trembles. On his final day, the master sat in front of that same old bronze mirror. His silver hair reflected softly in it. He whispered, "This shadow has turned white. This body has grown old. But the awareness of the shadow, that has never changed." Then he smiled and closed his eyes. His disciples knelt nearby, looking into the mirror, where their reflections merged with his. As the sun set, all the shadows faded into the evening light. Yet in their hearts, they understood, the shadow fades, but the reflecting light remains, just like the mirror, silently shining back every form without clinging to any. After the day, the master said, "The shadow exists because of you but is not you." The young novice held that teaching like a thread guiding his heart. Every morning, while washing his face, he would look in the mirror and remind himself, "This is only a shadow, not real." Passing by a still pond and seeing his wavering image in the water, he would sigh, "That too is just a shadow, there for a moment, then gone." At first, confusion still came. Sometimes, he felt afraid. If everything is a shadow, then what is real? But slowly, he began to understand. What mattered was not finding something real outside, but returning to the awareness that sees. That awareness never changes, no matter what the shadow does. Realizing that, his heart became lighter. The fear he once had when looking into the mirror disappeared. One day, while on alms round in the village, someone sneered, "That little monk is just a shadow leaning on the temple. He cannot do anything." Many brothers were angry, but the novice simply smiled and thought, "They are not wrong. I am a shadow, and I do not need to argue." The story spread, but instead of feeling hurt, he felt a sense of freedom. No one could touch the knowing inside him. Another time, when praised for giving clear Dharma talks, he did not become proud, because he remembered his master's words. Praise is a shadow. Criticism is a shadow. And so he remained calm, unattached. Years later, as a respected master, he shared with his students, "I once feared the shadow in the mirror. I thought it was real. But the more I chased it, the more exhausted I became. Only when I realized it was just a shadow did I finally let go." Life is the same. Fame, wealth, happiness, sorrow, they are all shadows. If you cling to them, you suffer. If you recognize them as shadows, you are free. The students listened, feeling a lightness in their hearts. Some went home, looked in the mirror the next morning, and smiled, remembering that the shadow was never real. On his final evening, the master sat beside the old bronze mirror. Sunset poured through the window. His reflection slowly faded from the mirror's surface. He breathed softly and said, "This shadow too is about to vanish. But the mirror still shines." Then he closed his eyes, peaceful, like a wisp of smoke drifting into the sky. His disciples knelt around him. Some cried, but when they looked into the mirror and saw their own reflections blending with his, they understood. The master had not gone. He had returned to the mirror, the endless awareness that reflects all things without ever clinging. And so, dear friend, this journey through Zen stories has been like a walk through forests, across rivers, and into the open skies of our own hearts. Each tale, each image, Each breath is a mirror, helping you look inward and recognize moments of stillness, moments of peace, and the gentle truth that sometimes, to rest is enough. If your eyes are slowly closing now, if your body feels light, and your mind as calm as a still pond, then smile. Sleep is near, soft as moonlight touching water. Let all worries, unfinished thoughts, and lingering tension dissolve like the clouds at dusk. Crescent moon, may your sleep be peaceful, gentle, and full of new energy when morning comes. And if these Zen stories bring you comfort or help you sleep deeply, do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications bell, so we can meet again in another quiet moment. Good night, and see you in the next story.